Chapter 184. Jean Wan suppressed the suspicion she had toward the person who took the photos. Since there's a reason for you to beat someone up, just tell me. Why are you so stubborn and unwilling to give a statement? Xia Tian immediately rolled her eyes at the police officer in the interrogation room. Who says the police are good for the good? I already said my leg was injured, but they still forced me into the police car and took me away. What's worse, they even confiscated my walking stick and said it was a weapon. They said that I was using my leg injury as an excuse to gain sympathy. What kind of police are they? Each and every one of them is like a block of wood and won't listen to what I say. It's obviously the person who took the photos secretly. Why did they lock me up here and interrogate me? The police officer had clearly heard Xia Tian's complaint, but he still said sternly and expressionlessly, "Madam Xia, recording a statement doesn't mean a conviction. No matter what the truth is, it's true that you beat someone up. If you don't give a clear statement, the police can only use a more forceful method to execute you." Xia Tian rolled her eyes and turned to whisper in Jean Wan's ear so that only she could hear. Earlier on, he was the one who forced me into the police car. Now he wants me to cooperate and give a statement. I won't let him off so easily. Jean Wan. Big sister, is the point right now to be angry with the police? Feng Ling, who was outside the police station, looked at the situation inside and turned to take her phone to make a call. Mr. Mo. After all, Xia Tian really hurt someone. Right now, not only did she refuse to cooperate with the interrogation, but she was also waiting for the hospital's evaluation. The police station refused to let her go, so Jean Wan decided to accompany Xia Tian in the police station. But she never expected Mo Jingshan would suddenly come here. When she saw Mo Jingshan's car, Jean Wan stood up in surprise and looked out. Xia Tian completely ignored the oppressive atmosphere in the police station. When she learned that Mo Jingshan would actually lower himself to come to such a place, she immediately smiled at Jean Wan with a gossipy expression. Jean Wan had just walked out when she heard that the police were cautiously and respectfully explaining the situation to Mo Jingshan. She rushed forward. Mo Jingshan, who was negotiating with the police, saw her and immediately looked in her direction. Jean Wan approached him and lowered her voice to say, "Xia Tian did this because of me. Did Feng Ling tell you about me at the police station?" Mo Jingshan did not reply. He looked at Jean Wan's expression and saw that she did not appear to have suffered any grievances in the police station. He then turned his attention to Xia Tian in the interrogation room. His gaze was calm and composed as he held Jean Wan's hand, calmly saying, "Wait for me in the car." But Xia Tian hasn't. She will be released soon. Since I'm here, don't worry and leave it to me in? Mo Jingshan's eyes were clear. In a place like the police station, Jean Wan was indeed not as powerful as Mo Jingshan. She did not say more, and returned to the car to wait. When he got on the car, Feng Ling followed him. Jean Wan sat in the car and looked at Feng Ling. "Did you find out that I was followed and photographed?" Feng Ling only hesitated for half a second before answering truthfully, "Yes." Jean Wan calmly glanced at her. "Why didn't you tell me in advance? That person has been following you for a long time, but he has been careful to keep his distance. The only things he could capture were photos of Mrs. Mo's daily life and work. There wasn't anything too personal," Feng Ling calmly said. "In order to make him give himself away, I intentionally made the security system in front of the studio malfunction so that the other party would lower his guard. I didn't expect that he would be unable to sit still so quickly. Originally, I wanted to take you down today, but I didn't expect Miss Xia Tian to discover it first. I also didn't expect Miss Xia Tian's temper to be so fiery. What's the other party's background?" Jean Wan's tone did not sound heavy, but her light words carried extra weight. This time, Feng Ling was silent for several seconds and did not directly answer. "You can't say?" When Jean Wan spoke, she acutely sensed that Feng Ling's gaze seemed to be directed toward the police station. She was looking in Mo Jingshan's direction. Feng Ling withdrew her gaze and still did not answer. Jean Wan stared at her. "Feng Ling, although Mr. Mo is your true employer, after all, you've been with me for the longest time. You should understand my character well. Although I'm not too persistent in getting to the bottom of things, nor will I make things difficult for you. I really hope that you can be more honest with me. Feng Ling was quiet for a moment. She watched Jin Wan's calm expression and softly said, "The other party's background is very simple. He's just an unknown reporter in High City. However, not long ago, his account suddenly received a transfer of 600,000 yuan. The sender is from Los Angeles, America." Speaking up to this point, Feng Ling looked at Jin Wan's narrowed eyes. "Mrs. Mo, if my guess is correct, the person behind him is the same person who sent the package." Jin Wan more or less guessed it. She directly asked, "You were once trained in a base in America, and you seem to have quite a good relationship with Nan Hung and the rest. So who exactly is this person, do you know?" This time Feng Ling quickly answered, "I don't know." The chill in Jin Wan's heart gradually rose. She understood Feng Ling's gaze. Although Feng Ling did not speak, she did not overdo it. However, Jin Wan could clearly feel that Feng Ling wanted to remind her of something, but she could not say more. After settling the matter at the police station, Jin Wan returned to the studio and called Xiaoba over. She had Xiaoba bring her the information on the delivery company in Los Angeles. She had to find that person. She had to find out who exactly it was. In the end, after Jin Wan finished her meeting and returned to the office, she heard Xiaoba say, "Boss Wan, that delivery company actually closed down." Jin Wan paused in her movements and raised her eyes to look at her. "What?" Xiaoba raised the information in her hands for her to see. "It's the company you asked me to investigate. Such a large international delivery company suddenly closed down a few days ago. Furthermore, their name has been removed from the American International Delivery Service Center. It's as though they disappeared overnight." Jin Wan took out the delivery receipt from the drawer and compared it with it. She then checked it on the computer. Indeed, it was as Xiaoba had said. This international delivery company really did declare bankruptcy in Los Angeles a few days ago. The entire company was sold off in pieces, and the company's name was also removed. It had only been a few days, but an internationally renowned delivery company had completely disappeared just like that. Chapter 185. Just as she was thinking, Feng Ling suddenly entered with a large bouquet of red roses in one hand and an exquisite small bag in the other. After entering, she placed these two items on Jin Wan's desk. Jin Wan had yet to return to herself. She raised her eyes to see the large bouquet of flowers. "What's this? Someone sent it over earlier. They said it's for you. I've checked it, and there's nothing wrong with it." Feng Ling looked at her. "For me?" Jin Wan pointed at the roses on the table, her gaze surprised. Feng Ling nodded and did not say more. She turned to leave. "Wow, there must be hundreds of them, right?" Xiaoba laid on Jin Wan's desk with an envious expression. "Who sent them? So romantic. Is it a gift from COMO? How would Jin Wan know who sent them? It wasn't her birthday, nor was it a special holiday or an anniversary. Besides, she had only found out about the incident at the police station this morning. It had only been a few hours since Mo Jingshan sent her back to the studio. Why would he suddenly send her flowers and gifts? Mo Jingshan was not schizophrenic." Jin Wan picked up the large bouquet of flowers in confusion. The delicate roses emitted the unique fragrance of roses. Each one seemed to have been carefully selected. With one glance, she could tell that they were of the highest quality. Not only were they expensive, even the outer packaging looked very girlish. It was made of pink paper. This color, Jin Wan could not help but recall the pink gown Xing Yihan had specially prepared for her. Many years ago, when she was in her teens, she would often follow Ji Hongwen to various events. She would often wear pink, whether it was her gown, shoes, or bag. At that time, she was indeed pink at heart. However, as time passed, she gradually lost her preference for such a girlish color. There was no gift card in the bouquet. She could not see the message or name. She casually picked up the exquisite small bag by the side. After opening it, she saw that it was a square gift box. When she opened it again, she saw that it was a white handmade luxury watch box. Until she saw that it was Van Cleef & Arpels' latest pink ladies watch. When Jin Wan saw the design on the watch, her expression immediately turned ugly. There was a card in the box. When she flipped it over, she saw several lines of black handwriting. Van Cleef and Arpels Lover's Bridge, the most romantic watch in the world. The boy showed the minutes, and the girl showed the hours. As the minutes and seconds approached, the boy anxiously counted the minutes, and the girl calmly counted the hours. Finally, when it was close to midnight, they could hug each other for a minute. Good luck, my girl. There was no signature or name on the entire card, but this was Sheng Yihan's handwriting. Jinwan recognized it. A few years ago, she had seen his handwriting in the Ji family. Later, when Xia Tian was hospitalized, she had also seen Sheng Yihan's diagnosis and medical records. What a beautiful watch! Little 8 was surprised, and when he saw the logo he said with stars in his eyes, "Oh my god! It was actually this brand. Super expensive." Before Xiaoba finished speaking, she was surprised to see Jinwan casually throw the large bouquet of roses into the wastebasket, and then push the box of watches out. "You like it? You can have it." 80. 3 drops of sweat rolled down her forehead. This was such an expensive thing. How could she dare to accept it? Jinwan looked at the watch box on the table and fell silent. A few days ago, she had just gone back to expose Shun Haru. Today, Sheng Yihan suddenly sent her flowers and a gift. What did he mean by this? Was he using this method to greet her from afar? Or was it a declaration of war? Was he reminding her that he was unhappy that she had ruined his plans? Was he deliberately sending her this so-called lover's bridge to keep her at bay? The entire office was filled with the fragrance of roses. Jinwan was originally not affected by these things. After a while, she abruptly stood up and walked out. She opened the door and called Xiaoba back. "Take the flowers out and throw them away. Spray some air freshener in the office. Call me when the smell has dissipated." After speaking, he walked out. Xiaoba was dumbstruck. Even now, she did not know who had sent the flowers and gifts. She also did not know why Jinwan was not happy at all after receiving these things. Instead, it was as though she had eaten a fly. She did not dare to tarry. She returned to the office and followed Jinwan's instructions to clean up the flowers. She then put on some air freshener and opened the windows. She turned back to look at the watch box on the table. She felt that this thing was really too expensive. If Boss Nwan was unhappy and asked her to take care of this thing, she would not know how to deal with it. Thus, she directly placed the watch box into Jinwan's bag. She then clapped her hands with a relaxed expression and left the office. The result of Xiaoba's actions was that Jinwan brought the watch home with her without knowing it. When she finally realized it, it was already after her shower. Mo Jingshan came from the bedroom next door. When he saw the bag Jinwan had thrown by the bedside, he saw a white watch box inside. His deep, cold eyes darkened. He walked over with a cold, handsome face. When he approached, he saw the watch box in the bag. He took it out and saw that it was printed with Van Cleef and Arpels, the symbol of Lover's Bridge. It was a luxury brand owned by a famous French family of jewelry and watches. He took the watch out for a look. The sound of water in the bathroom had stopped. Jinwan walked out while drying her hair. When she saw him and the watch in his hands, her footsteps paused. She stared at him, and then at the watch. Her eyes were filled with obvious surprise. Why was this watch here? Didn't she ask Xiaoba to take care of it in the morning? Why did she bring it back? Jinwan placed the towel on her head down. She suddenly felt awkward. The man's figure stood by the bedside. His heavy and cold gaze met hers for 3 to 4 seconds. "Who gave it to you?" Mo Jingshan asked softly. However, it was clear that there was no need for her to answer. He already knew the answer. After all, Feng Ling no longer dared to hide anything about Jinwan. Jinwan must have already told him about the gift she received today. Although she did not intentionally bring this watch back, under his gaze, Jinwan still felt that it was a huge mistake not to open the window and throw the watch out of Jinlin building. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was still staring at her, Jinwan scratched her hair. Things like receiving gifts are usually one-sided. Furthermore, I didn't intend to bring this thing back. Back then, I wanted to have someone throw it out, but Mo Jingshan calmly cut her off. Answer. Jinwan. It was Sheng Yihan. Chapter 186. I didn't want to keep it. You can't blame me. My assistant probably saw that the watch was too expensive and didn't dare to throw it away, so he stuffed it into my bag. I didn't notice it before I came back, Jinwan explained helplessly. Mo Jingshan looked at her for a moment and did not speak. He threw the pink watch into the trash can. Jinwan did not even look at the watch, thinking that it was fine to throw it away. It suited her. Anyway, she really didn't want to keep Sheng Yihan's things. At this time, Mo Jingshan received a call from the company and turned to enter the study. 10 minutes later, the door to the study was opened again. The man came out expressionlessly and then dug out the watch from the trash can. He held the watch and walked out. "What are you doing?" Jinwan asked in confusion. When Jinwan walked out, she saw that Auntie Chen had brought up a cup of water. Mo Jingshan saw it and casually threw the watch into the cup. Steam rose from the cup. Silently, the time on the watch was fixed at 9 o'clock p.m. The boy and girl in the watch were at an untouchable distance. From now on, they could no longer approach each other. Auntie Chen held the cup with a surprised expression. She did not understand what was going on. Because Jinwan's body was cold, she would bring up a cup of water at this time every day. When it was no longer so hot, she would let Jinwan drink it. She promised to let her drink a cup of warm water every day. But today Jinwan stood by the door, the corner of her lips twitching. Once and for all, this method was indeed Mo Jingshan's. A watch of this price was not afraid of water or falling, but it was afraid of boiling water. "Mr. Mo." Auntie Chen stared at the cup in a daze. "This watch. Throw it out." Mo Jingshan's tone was cold. Auntie Chen nodded. Anyway, this cup of water could not be drunk. She took it downstairs quickly and planned to pour another cup and bring it up. Before Mo Jingshan returned to the room, he glanced at Jinwan. "What are you looking at? You can't bear to?" Jinwan chuckled. After all, it was urgent for her to go to T-City. She could not provoke him at this time. "Of course I can bear to. I wanted to throw it out during the day," she said as she followed him back to the room. After closing the door, Mo Jingshan saw that she seemed to have something to say and glanced at her indifferently. Smiling so obsequiously, "Are you afraid that I won't let you go to T-City?" Was there a need to always see through her like this? The corner of Jinwan's mouth twitched. "It's indeed about to start. Since you've decided to go, just focus on your studies. Someone will arrange everything else for you." Mo Jingshan's tone was still unfriendly. He had clearly given in to her so-called grand goal and desire, but it was clear that Sheng Yihan's blatant provocation made it difficult for him to soften his tone. "Really? Then I have to hand over all the projects in the studio as soon as possible. Several subordinates and assistants in my studio have gone to Xia Tian's place tonight. I'll have a video conference with them tonight and explain it well." Looking at Mo Jingshan's unhappy face, Jinwan stepped forward to hold his arm with a pleading expression. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her. Seeing that she did not show any emotions due to Sheng Yihan's matter, he calmly said, "The computer is on. Go." Jinwan glanced at the time. It was almost time for the meeting with Xia Tian and the rest. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was planning to let her off, she did not argue with her. She suddenly smiled and hugged his neck, pulling him down. She forced him to lower his head and planted a kiss on the corner of his lips. After kissing him, she was afraid that he would turn around and throw her onto the bed. She slipped out of his embrace and quickly turned to enter the study. Jinwan sat in front of the computer, having a video conference with Xia Tian and the rest. According to the schedule, they would be leaving for T-City the day after tomorrow. Although the 3 months of study would pass in the blink of an eye, the studio was currently in the development stage. Everything was her blood, sweat, and tears. She had to explain it well. As Mo Jingshan often had video conferences with overseas partners, the video camera on the computer in his study was very high definition. From the screen on Xia Tian's side, Jinwan seemed to be sitting opposite them. During the meeting, Xia Tian held the proposal that Xiao Ba handed to her. "Don't worry. In the next 3 months, I'll definitely help you secure the #1 sales position in High City's real estate industry. I've seen the land and properties you've acquired, and the series of plans you're about to carry out. You really have a good eye. You've already laid these cornerstones. I don't need to exert too much effort. As long as you can safely and steadily hold the current ones in the studio, it will be enough. You have to have confidence in us. Jinwon supported her chin with one hand and looked at them. Of course I have confidence. High City's geographical location is also unique. I'm not in a hurry about sales. Now the most important thing is the human resources department of the studio. Help me keep a close eye on the people recruited by the human resources department in the future. We don't need too many people, but we must use every one of them. Then they briefly discussed the room for improvement of the studio. Several colleagues who were at Xiatian's home pointed out the small problems in the studio's operation and other aspects that were easily overlooked. Jinwon also seriously discussed with them how to increase the probability of converting the real estate and the current resources under the studio's name into liquid capital without any loss, and how to be more flexible. After a while, Xia Tian on the screen suddenly looked surprised, and Xiaoba also suddenly looked at Jinwon with a startled expression. Jinwon looked at them in confusion and subconsciously turned back, but she didn't see when Mo Jingxian had entered the study. The man was holding the boiled water that Auntie Chen had brought in. Right now the temperature of the water was just right. He stood there, and the warm light in the study was reflected on the glass in his hand. He didn't seem to want to interrupt her ongoing meeting. However, at this moment, the people on the other side of the computer were staring straight at him. Xiaoba suddenly exclaimed, "In my lifetime, I've actually seen COMO in real life." Jinwon. Chapter 187. That man who only needed to stand there quietly to attract everyone's attention was really the living Mo Jingxian. She had always heard of his name, but never seen him. Jinwon was usually low-key and would never specially let Mo Jingxian appear in the studio. At this moment, the people on the other side of the computer were staring at him like wolves and tigers. Mo Jingxian's expression was calm. He walked over, placed the glass by Jinwon's hand, and then glanced at the proposal displayed on her computer screen. "You came at the right time. Help me take a look at these places." Jinwon hurriedly pointed at the screen. "These are the areas we are considering to develop, but because the previous two companies of the studio have not performed well, many friendly companies are only cooperating with the studio for the sake of Mo Corporation. Except for the BGY group a few days ago, the rest are still in the wait-and-see stage, so the concentration and popularity of these projects are not very optimistic." Jinwon nodded and said, "You're right." Speaking up to this point, Jinwon turned to Mo Jingxian. "In fact, I can understand. Right now the property market is indeed not very optimistic. Coupled with the studio's previous performance, if it weren't for your intervention, I'm afraid we would be a group of children with no one to care about us. So now we have to go through the invisible obstacles." Xia Tian could not hold it in any longer and suddenly said, "COMO, the one who has to overcome the obstacles step by step is your family's Jinwon, not me. She's so concerned about her face that she has to suffer. There are many things that she is unwilling to ask for your help with. Look, right now, we just want you to help us draw a few key points and choose a few projects for us. She can't even ask for such a small request." Xia Tian tapped her fingers on the computer table and ignored Jinwon's glare. She continued to say, "You have to know that in the next few months, this studio will be under my management. My leg is still crippled. COMO, please be kind and give us some advice, so that we don't have to take a detour, and we can all be at ease. Jinwon can also rest assured. You don't want her to worry about things here every day when she's away to study, do you?" Mo Jingxian did not look at the people on the computer screen. He only indifferently glanced at the little woman, who was sitting in front of the computer and drinking water with an awkward expression. He opened his mouth, and there was a hint of gentleness and indulgence in his indifferent tone. "Briefly repeat what you just discussed." Jinwon was about to put down the glass of water she had just taken a sip of, but Xiaoba, who was sitting opposite her, eagerly took the information in her hand and began to give a brief account. Because she had already given the information, Xiaoba's words were clear and orderly, and perhaps because the other party was Mo Jingxian, Xiaoba didn't dare to say any nonsense and spoke concisely. After speaking, Xiaoba looked up with admiration and said carefully, "COMO, do you need me to show you the details of the plan again?" "Thank you for your hard work." "No need," Mo Jingshan calmly said. His gaze had already landed on the page of the plan on Jin Wan's computer screen. He bent down and placed his hand on Jin Wan's. She was currently holding the mouse, and he held her hand and clicked on the mouse several times. He flipped through several pages of the plan and saw the plan inside. A moment later, Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze and watched Jin Wan's face illuminated by the computer screen. He looked at her exceptionally serious expression and chuckled softly. His tone was slightly indifferent and filled with indescribable doting. Circle the fifth item on the third page. For the next month, focus on this project. Jin Wan immediately flipped the plan back to the page he had mentioned and focused on it. As expected, this piece of land was purchased by me at the end of last month. Right now, High Cities Tourism Bureau is planning to develop this area into a tourism development zone. I originally planned to suppress this area for a period of time, but the Tourism Bureau has sent out many people to interfere with the price of the land nearby. Thus, this area should be regulated and can't be suppressed any longer. We should stop while we're ahead. As Mo Jingshan helped her highlight the key points of this project, he marked all the areas that included the predicted price increase. His meaning was clear and also gave her a hint. Is it because you have someone in the city's tourism bureau and know that they will only release the regulation policy in a month, so you want me to suppress it for at most another month? Jin Wan asked. Mo Jingshan, yes. It was just a single word. He said it lightly, yet it was as it should be. This was a very simple logic. Even if Jin Wan had the ability to predict the future 10 years from now, she could not do everything perfectly. On the other hand, Mo Jingshan's status was different. In this enormous high city, regardless of whether it was the business or political world, he had a certain amount of connections. He could obtain the most direct and accurate plans in advance, and it was many times more effective than her so-called prediction ability. Thus, a man like him was truly terrifying, not to mention turning back time by 10 years. Even if he was thrown into the torrent of history, he would still be able to control everything. He could always look at the entire situation and stand at the top of the pyramid. When Mo Jingshan helped her highlight the key points, he gave her a concise and comprehensive analysis. Jin Wan listened attentively. In the study, only their voices could be heard. The video was on the entire time. Xia Tian, Xiao Ba, and the others could be described as absolutely quiet. Wasn't the legendary Mo Jingshan aloof, cold, and unreasonable? But right now, the dignified CEO Mo did not pay any attention to anyone on the computer ever since he entered the study. His eyes were only focused on Jin Wan, and they were vaguely filled with warmth and patience. Even when Jin Wan's thoughts coincided with his, there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. How was this the cold and aloof CEO Mo? He was clearly a top-quality, warm man who was like a rare treasure. But it was clear that this treatment was only for Jin Wan alone. As for the others, they were not even worthy of his attention. After Mo Jingshan finished highlighting and analyzing the key points, Jin Wan simply sat in front of the computer to carefully rearrange the information that had been highlighted. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head twice and did not say anything more, turning to leave. So envious, so blissful. What should I do? I want to fall in love. This is practically a royal level of dog food. As the study door was closed, the computer finally began to resound with voices. Even Xia Tian could not help but click her tongue. Not bad, Jin Wan. Sure enough, today is different from the past. Even the dog food of the century has been stuffed into my hands. Jin Wan earnestly typed as she said. Earlier on, the key points that he mentioned. Did you all hear it? I'll edit the documents here and send them to you. Let's continue talking about this. Chapter 188. However, what caused them to break down was that the royal level of dog food did not end here. After a while, Jin Wan's meeting had yet to end. Furthermore, it was already late at night, and the main points had already been drawn. The women chatted about the studio while chattering about various unrelated topics. A colleague sitting by Xia Tian's side suddenly teased, "Boss, Our studio was invested in by Mo Corporation. When are we going to invite CEO Mo to our studio for an inspection? That's right, that's right. That's right. Let's not look at CEO Mo through the screen. The women began to make a fuss again. Even Xia Tian joined in and teased her. Just as Jin Wan was trying her best to maintain a stern expression and was about to continue the meeting with a calm expression, the door to the study opened again. Mo Jingshan's voice came from the door. Do you want to drink milk? As Mo Jingshan's voice landed, the several heads on the computer screen nodded in unison. Their faces were filled with anticipation, as though the person Boss Missouri had asked was them. Jin Wan glanced at the water that she had barely drunk earlier. If she did not drink something hot tonight, Mo Jingshan would most likely not let it go. She nodded. A moment later, Mo Jingshan brought her a cup of warm milk. He softly instructed her to drink it while it was hot, and to rest early. He then left and did not return. After that, the meeting continued. Every time Jin Wan picked up the cup of milk to drink, the several pairs of eyes on the computer screen would stare at her. I want to drink milk too. I don't care. I'm going downstairs to buy it right now. Me too. Me too. No matter how I try, the milk I buy won't taste as good as the one Boss Missouri personally brings. In order to lose weight, I didn't even eat at night. Now, I'm soaking in plain water and milk. I'm about to explode. Envy, jealousy, and hate. I really want to have a man like Mo to kiss, hug, and hold up high every day. Jin Wan listened to their nagging and decided to gulp down the milk in the cup. She then placed the cup down heavily and said with a calm and serious expression, "Continue the meeting." Jin Wan had lived in High City for many years. Ever since she was young, aside from studying in America for a few years, she had never left High City. When they were about to leave for T-City, Ji Hongwen was busy with trivial matters at the G Corporation and couldn't find time to send Jin Wan off. He only sent someone from his family to bring some things for her and called to inform them. When he learned that Mo Jingshan would personally send Jin Wan over, he was relieved. It was already winter in High City, and everything was frozen. T-City was located in the south, so it was only slightly colder than summer. When he got off the plane, it was already early evening in T-City, and it was drizzling. Jin Wan wanted to say that she could just take a taxi to T University. After all, Mo Jingshan had been particularly busy these past 2 days. He had compressed his work for the next few days, to be completed in the first 2 days. Today was the same. Originally, he had an important meeting at 3 in the afternoon. It had been scheduled for several days, but it just so happened to coincide with the time he was supposed to send Jin Wan to T-City. Last night, Mo Jingshan had informed his subordinates and pushed the meeting forward to 10 in the morning. Mo Corporation had several branches in T-City. When Jin Wan stepped out of the airport hall, she realized that there was already a car waiting outside. When are you returning to High City? After getting on the car, Jin Wan glanced at the time. She did not know how long Mo Jingshan would be accompanying her here. Tomorrow morning at 7. Mo Jingshan responded, speaking softly. I've arranged a place for you near T University. I'll send your luggage there first, and accompany you to buy some daily necessities. If there's anything else you need, remember to give Auntie Chen a call, and have her send it over. It was already past 8 in the evening. There were less than 11 hours left before they would be parting. His plane was at 7 tomorrow morning, which meant that he had to leave at least 2 hours in advance. Adding in the numbers, there were only a few hours left before they would be parting. Feng Ling will arrive in T-City before noon tomorrow. She'll go directly to your place. He saw that Jin Wan kept looking at the time. It was clear that she was reluctant to part with him, but she refused to say it. He pinched her face. Are you sure you want to stay here? Since I'm already here, there's no need for me to think too much. I thought that Feng Ling would have to take a break for the next few months. Actually, I'll be spending most of my time in T University. There's no need for her to come over. Mo Jingshan's expression was calm, but his tone was undeniable. I'm leaving you alone in T-City. From the looks of it, you want to return to High City with me. Jin Wan. Forget it. With Feng Ling by her side, she could indeed avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble. When did you arrange a place for me? I heard that T University's dormitory environment isn't bad. I originally planned to stay in the dormitory. If you stay in the dormitory, I'm afraid I won't be able to casually warm your bed. Jin-won, who wanted him to warm her bed. She clearly wanted to be a proper student. All right. Jin-won's residence near T University was much better than she had imagined. It was a well-equipped condominium with more than 200 square meters of space. I'm living in such a large house alone, and I'm here to study. The amount of time I can come back to stay is very little. This is too much of a waste. Jin-won walked one round around the condominium. When she came out, she saw that Emo Jingshin had also entered. Even if you can only come back for an hour a week, I can't let my Mrs. Emo suffer. Emo Jingshin pushed the suitcase in his hands. The silver suitcase immediately ran to the wall and stood firmly against it. Even the movement of pushing the suitcase was so handsome. This man, faced with the impending separation, Jin-won suddenly suspected that he was intentionally seducing her. She immediately ran to the kitchen to take a look. Everything had really been prepared for her. Everything that could be used was there. There was basically no need for her to buy too many things. She then opened the fridge. It was already filled with various fresh fruits and ingredients. She took them out to take a look at the date on the packaging. They had all been sent over today. You're returning to High City tomorrow. I'm guessing that I won't be able to eat a meal you personally made for several months. Jin-won suddenly clasped her hands together and looked at him. Her expression was expectant as she said, "Do you want to make me another delicious meal tonight? To satisfy my stomach?" Emo Jingshin did not even bat an eyelid. He calmly spat out 2 words. "Not doing it." Jin-won. "Why? I'm hungry right now." The man glanced at her with his inky eyes. Jin-won walked over and was about to pull him into the kitchen. She wanted to coax and persuade him to show off his skills once more. Chapter 189. The lights in the room were not turned on, and only a faint moonlight shone through. Jin-won was directly brought in by him, and was almost pushed into the bedroom. A new environment, a new bedroom, a new bed. Everything was unfamiliar, causing one to be especially sensitive. She welcomed the man's kiss, and her body instantly ignited. Her eyes blurred as she hugged the man on top of her. Her voice trembled as she said, "I haven't eaten yet." The man's movements did not stop. He said in a heavy voice, "I'll eat first today." With that, Emo Jingshin turned over and covered her body. She let out a low ah. Because of his movements, she subconsciously closed her legs, but she couldn't stop him at all. His hand traced the extremely sensitive part of her waist. It was slightly itchy and numb to the bone. Jin-won quickly felt something hot and hard pressing against her. She was about to ask him to be gentler when the man suddenly kissed her on the lips. "It'll be your birthday in half a month. Go back to High City to celebrate your birthday in? I don't know how my classes will progress by then. If there's no time, then don't celebrate your birthday." She had yet to finish speaking when the man actually entered without any warning. Hearing her suppressed low cry, the man's lips curled into a victorious smile. "You have to go back." He lowered his voice by her lips, and it was unexpectedly forceful and domineering. Just like the movement of his lower body, she could not avoid it. "The first birthday after our marriage, we'll go back to High City to celebrate, remember? What if there's an exam or some other activity, and the professor doesn't let me go back? The classes here are only 3 months long. I think we should not go back." His movements became more ruthless, and each thrust became deeper and harder than the last. Jin-won had already been on the plane for an entire afternoon, and right now, she could barely keep up. After being bullied so harshly and heavily, she could not even speak properly. She could only hoarsely whimper. I'll try my best, alright. Good girl." He finally kissed her lips in satisfaction, but the force of his lower body did not lessen. What could be more frustrating than being pressed down on the bed by the great boss Missouri for close to 2 hours, when one was so tired and hungry that they wanted nothing more than to lie down on the bed and sleep through the night. Yet, one still had to get out of bed and go to the nearby supermarket to buy something. Although there were ingredients at home, they were not complete. Thankfully, when they arrived at the supermarket, Mo Jingshan generously allowed her to eat at a Chinese restaurant in front of the entrance. But even if she was full, her entire body had just been devoured by him not long ago. Her legs were still sore when she left the house, and her calves trembled as she walked. If it weren't for the fact that Mo Jingshan's flight was tomorrow morning, and he could only accompany her to buy things tonight, she really wanted to bite him to death. She lived near T University, and there were many people in the supermarket near the university. Jinwan pushed the shopping cart, checking to see if there was anything missing. When she raised her eyes, she saw Mo Jingshan standing not far in front of her. He held a heat pack in his hand. His fingers were long and slender, and his skin color was much cleaner than most men's. It was a stark contrast to the red heat pack. He was currently looking at several different brands on the shelves and asking the shop assistant about the differences. Every time Jinwan's period came, her stomach would hurt. She had always had a cold body when she was young, so her stomach would hurt more than most people during those few days of the month. However, she often endured it and did not say anything. She would only drink more hot water to relieve the pain. She did not expect that Mo Jingshan would actually help her choose something like a heat pack from the supermarket. She pushed the shopping cart over and approached him. This man truly possessed all the qualities that attracted others. Most of the girls who passed by were students from the nearby area. When their gazes landed on him, they revealed various kinds of admiration and curiosity. Today, Mo Jingshan did not wear a suit. He did not appear as cold and unapproachable as he usually did in the company. Today he was dressed casually. Although he was low-key and gentle, people like him would always stand out in the crowd. As Jinwan approached, she saw that he was politely asking the shop assistant about the usage of the heat packs. His voice was low and pleasant to the ears. In this ordinary supermarket, he seemed to have put on a different temperament. He was as warm as jade and had an otherworldly aura. Even though Jinwan and he were already very close and had just been intimate on the bed at home, Jinwan still couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. But at this moment, she still couldn't tear her eyes away. This man, yes, it was really beautiful. He had never felt that time passed so quickly. When he returned from the supermarket, it was already late at night. After tidying up the things they bought, Mo Jingshan fulfilled her wish. Although they had a casual dinner outside, he still made her some supper. After eating her fill, Jinwan saw the man sitting on the sofa in the living room. She glanced at the time. There were only 4 hours left before he left for the airport. She leaned over to say, "Let's watch TV together." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. The little woman was clearly tired, but she insisted on not going to sleep. His elegant brows moved as he calmly said, "Come here." Jinwan sat by his side, passing the remote control to him. "What do you want to watch? Financial news or a foreign television station?" "I rarely watch TV. Whatever you like, you can change it yourself." Mo Jingshan held the little woman by his side, caressing her soft, smooth hair. "If you're tired, go to sleep. There's no need to accompany me here." Jinwan glanced at him. In the end, she could not bear to sleep. She sat by his side, switching on the television and changing several channels. As she did so, she asked, "Do you want to watch a variety show? Anything is fine." As for what to watch, Mo Jingshan did not have any objections. In the end, the so-called variety show was just a few popular male stars in the country acting coquettishly on stage. They were even better at showing off than women. From time to time, they would wink seductively and show off their abs. Jinwan watched with great interest. He casually picked up the remote control and changed the channel. "Watch something else." "Oh." Jinwan was confused. "Then how about watching a movie?" Jinwan switched to a movie channel. In the movie, the male lead was whispering sweet nothings to the female lead. Jinwan's eyes brightened. She suddenly pointed at the handsome face on the screen. "Aya, this man seems to be a senior, who was 2 years older than me when I was studying in America. Back then, I heard that he wanted to be an artist. I didn't expect that he would actually act in a movie. And he's even the main lead. His acting skills aren't bad. He's also much more handsome than before." Mo Jingshan was expressionless. "His acting skills are average. Change the channel." "Jinwan." She glanced at him. I feel that it's quite good. Not good, change the channel. Chapter 190. Although Jin-won wanted to continue watching, she saw that Mo Jingshin was clearly very dissatisfied with this movie. In the past, he had never been so picky about her taste. However, no matter how she looked at the channel, none of them were good. Her entire mind was focused on the passing time. She felt that every minute and every second was making her heart tighten little by little. Back then, she had shamelessly boasted that it was only 3 months. Now, let alone 3 months. She felt that even waiting for her birthday half a month later was too slow. She did not know what was being shown on the television. She casually switched channels and leaned her head on Mo Jingshin's shoulder. The room was very quiet. The lights were all off, and only the television's light and sound could be heard. After an unknown period of time, the unknown movie had already finished broadcasting. Mo Jingshin shifted his gaze from the television screen to Jin-won's face. He looked at the little woman who had fallen asleep in his arms. Previously, when they were eating supper, Jin-won had mentioned that recently, she had been eating and sleeping exceptionally well. If she continued to maintain this state in T-City, she would most likely become a round fatty by the time she returned to High City. She was already so skinny. It was impossible to hope for her to become a round fatty, but being able to eat and sleep was also good. Mo Jingshin gently raised her head, stood up, and carried her up by the waist. He carried her back to the bedroom and placed her on the bed. T-City. Jin-won took the opportunity to visit the professor before the classes began. The professor's surname was Lin. Not only was he very good at teaching business management, he could also be considered an old acquaintance of her father. After greeting Professor Lin, she also learned that all the students accepted by Professor Lin were extraordinary. Most of the students he took in were the heirs of Chinese companies in China and abroad, or the senior managers of some famous groups. Because everyone did not have much time, they could only squeeze their time into these few months. The schedule for classes and exams was very tight. To save time, the professor suggested that Jin-won stay in school as much as possible. T University had a special VIP dormitory. After Mo Jingshin returned to High City, Jin-won stayed alone in such a large condominium. Although she did not lack anything, whenever she slept, she would always think of the night Mo Jingshin stayed here. In the end, she still chose to move to the school dormitory. The business department's VIP dormitory was on the 6th floor. It was separated from the normal students' dormitory and had plenty of sunlight. However, it was still a school environment. No matter what, resources were limited, and the best was a 4-person dormitory. When Jin-won pushed open the door and entered, she saw a girl around her age sitting on the bed talking on the phone. All kinds of branded products, cell phones, and computers were thrown on the bed. She was focused on talking on the phone and did not tidy up anything. It was clear that she was a pampered young lady. Jin-won had left most of her things in the condominium. She only brought the smallest suitcase with her. She only brought a simple introduction and could bring it back to the condominium to retrieve it. She could use to bring it back anytime. She had just sat down by her bed when another person walked in. This person was around 25 or 26 years old. She was dressed fashionably and appeared slightly mature. Her actions were straightforward and efficient. After entering the room, she greeted Jin-won and the person inside and introduced herself. She said that she was the vice president of Hung Yun Corporation and that her name was Bai Wei. She had come here to further her studies. After a simple self-introduction, she carried her luggage to her bed and began to pack. She did not say a single word of nonsense. The girl on the phone put down the phone after another 10 minutes. She looked at the two of them and realized that her bed was really messy. She then began to tidy it up lazily. She placed a bunch of expensive cosmetics and skincare products on the public table. They were all international brands, and even the cheapest one was from Aquamarine Mystery, which cost more than 2,000 yuan. Hey, how did you guys clean up so quickly? The girl tidied up her makeup and looked at their clean bed and table enviously. Jin-won glanced at her small suitcase. I don't have many things. The girl glanced at Jin-won and raised her brows. She then turned to look at Bai Wei on the other bed. Seeing that the skincare products Bai Wei had brought out were not cheap, She directly asked. Your body smells so good. Aya, you're using the C family's latest perfume from last month, right? And it was the limited edition one. I went to France and asked people to queue for a long time, but they couldn't buy it. You actually have it. Bai Wei glanced at her and casually responded before continuing to tidy up. It was clear that she was not in the mood to talk too much with this kind of noisy rich young lady. Seeing that she was ignoring her, the girl could only turn to look at Jin Wan. Why did you bring so few things? That's right, earlier she said her name was Bai Wei. Which company's vice president is she from? Bai Wei casually replied, Hongyun Corporation. Oh, that's right, Hongyun Corporation. I've heard of this company before. It's the largest technology company in T-City. I think it's been listed for a long time, hasn't it? The girl then said. My father is the chairman of the Ling Group Bank. 50% of the Ling Group Bank's shares in the country belong to my family. I'm Ling Feifei. As she spoke, Ling Feifei turned to look at Jin Wan. What about you? Jin Wan was silent for a moment before replying. I'm in charge of a real estate studio in High City. Jin Wan. The moment Ling Feifei heard this, she immediately lost interest in Jin Wan's gaze. She casually asked, Studio? That investment shouldn't be much, right? She was just short of saying how a small character like Jin Wan, who could not even be seen in public, could be accepted as Professor Lin's student. But since you're from High City, do you know of the MO Corporation? Ling Feifei did not have much interest in Jin Wan, whose identity could not be seen in public. However, it was clear that she had an indescribable yearning for the MO Corporation. As she spoke these words, her eyes shone. But then again, who in High City doesn't know of the MO Corporation? Ling Feifei sat there and said, I'm sure you've only heard of it. It's such a pity. It's so rare to meet someone from High City, but it's actually from a small studio. Jin Wan. Ling Feifei realized that she had spoken too quickly. She suddenly smiled awkwardly at Jin Wan. Aya, what I meant was, a company like the MO Corporation usually wouldn't cooperate with a small studio like this. I was just saying. Please don't take it to heart. Jin Wan's brows moved slightly as she smiled. I don't mind. Chapter 191. I usually only use a bottle of water. Jin Wan pointed at the small items she had placed by her pillow. Among them was a light green glass bottle. Ling Feifei glanced at it, but could not recognize the brand. What brand is this? How much is it? I forgot. I think it's around 600 yuan. Ling Feifei was shocked. Only 600 yuan? Ling Feifei glanced at the moisturizer in her hands, that was worth more than 10,000 yuan. Suddenly, she did not wish to speak to Jin Wan anymore. Bai Wei, who had not interjected earlier, suddenly spoke up. I often use Jin Wan's moisturizer as well. People with especially good skin usually only use this. Ling Feifei pursed her lips and did not speak. However, it was clear that she was already extremely unhappy that Professor Lin had arranged for her to share a dormitory with someone without status and money. She was just holding it in. Jin Wan could see the disdain in this young lady's expression. She did not speak and only smiled at Bai Wei. Professor Lin had said that the majority of the students this time were young masters and young ladies with good family backgrounds, and had their eyes set on the top of their heads. Furthermore, the class would only last for a short 3 months. Before they could understand each other, it would end. Thus, there was no need for her to reveal her trump card. Ling Feifei's luggage was truly too much. She could not fit all of it in her room, so she placed the other suitcase on the empty bed by the side. There should only be 3 people in this dormitory, right? Ling Feifei asked as she placed it. She had yet to finish her words when the door to the dormitory opened once more. Another young girl entered. The girl was dressed in a white dress. After entering, she glanced inside. Her gaze finally landed on Jin Wan, who was closest to the door. Hello, I'm sorry I'm late. There should still be a place for me in the dormitory, right? Bai Wei and Jin Wan simultaneously glanced toward the bed occupied by Ling Feifei's luggage. Ling Feifei's expression was clearly unhappy. However, under the gazes of the 3 of them, she could only place the luggage down and turn to return to her own bed. The girl who had just come and walked up to the bed and looked at Jin Wan who was looking at her cell phone in the next bed. Hello, my name is Su Shuei. In the next 3 months, we'll sleep next to each other like this. Let's make friends. Jin Wan raised her eyes from her phone and glanced at Su Shuei on the bed next door. Seeing that she was smiling brightly, Jin Wan nodded. This Su Shuei seemed to be about the same age as Jin Wan, but she had an innocent and naive look, which easily made people let down their guard. Classes would officially start tomorrow, and the 4 people in the dormitory were all present. It was inevitable that they would have to introduce themselves again. Su Shuei seemed to like talking to Jin Wan very much. Just now, she sat on Jin Wan's bed and exchanged phone numbers with her. When it was Su Shuei's turn to introduce herself, she smiled and said, I'm from Los Angeles in America. My family has all kinds of businesses, and one of the more famous ones is a Chinese company in Los Angeles, Swan Group. My father holds 60% of the shares. Hearing the word Swan Group, the arrogant Ling Feifei suddenly took several glances at Su Shuei. Her arrogant expression changed, as though she had finally found a roommate who was worthy of living in the same dormitory as her. You're actually from America. Aren't there many outstanding lecturers overseas? Why did you come to our country to study business management? Su Shuei smiled. After all, my family is a Chinese company. I still need to understand the local culture. My family has some relatives in T-City. They suggested that I come here, so I came. After that, they chatted for a while. Jin Wan would occasionally reply, but because Jin Wan's identity was too ordinary, Ling Feifei, that chatterbox, spent the entire time currying favor with Su Shuei, and by way, she ignored Jin Wan and would occasionally ask a question, but it was clear that she was not interested in her. Jin Wan was also happy to be left alone. Not long later, Feng Ling gave Jin Wan a call and asked her if she wanted to eat dinner in T University or go out. The dormitory was filled with Ling Feifei's fervent chatter. It was too noisy, so she naturally chose to go out. Jin Wan had just left the dormitory when Su Shuei followed her out. Jin Wan, it's already dark. Where are you going? Jin Wan glanced at her. I'll be back after eating dinner. Do you have something to do? Hearing this, Su Shuei moved closer to her side and held her arm, speaking intimately. Then let's go eat together. This is our first time in T-City, and we're unfamiliar with this place. It's good to have companions. Jin Wan's lips curved, her smile was mild. It was not that she was cold, but Su Shuei's sudden familiarity made her feel that something was amiss. We'll eat together another day. I have an appointment with a friend tonight. All right then. Let's go together tomorrow? Su Shuei followed her persistently. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Before Jin Wan stepped out of the dormitory, she saw that Su Shuei was still looking at her. She turned to look at her again, asking, Earlier on, you said that you came from Los Angeles? Su Shuei smiled and nodded. That's right. Jin Wan smiled deeply and said meaningfully, Not bad. It's really a city that makes one yearn to go to. Su Shuei's expression was startled for a moment. Yearn, you've never been to Los Angeles? Jin Wan watched her expression without batting an eyelid. She raised her brows slightly. Why? Should I have been there? No, I'm just surprised. Earlier on, I heard Feifei and the others mention that they had all gone to Los Angeles for a vacation. I thought you had been there too. Su Shuei stared at her eyes for a moment before her sweet and harmless smile returned. Jin Wan smiled and glanced at the time. I'm sorry, my friend is still waiting for me. Su Shuei could only nod. Just as Jin Wan was about to leave, she suddenly asked, It's already so late, and you're still going to eat dinner. You're leaving in such a hurry. Could the person waiting for you be your boyfriend? Jin Wan did not reply. She raised her brows and looked at her with a slight smile. What do you want to eat? Do you want me to pack it for you? Su Shuei's expression faltered. She then smiled and answered, A portion of spaghetti. Thank you. After leaving T University, Feng Ling had been waiting for Jin Wan for a long time. The two of them casually ate at a Western restaurant near T University. Jin Wan cut the steak and glanced at Feng Ling, who was quietly eating her steak. I want to ask you a few questions. What? Have you heard of Los Angeles' Swan Group? Yes. Jin Wan's hands, which were holding onto the knife and fork, paused. Then is there any special relationship between Swan Group and Shine Group? Or, is there any relationship between her and Emo Jingshan? Chapter 192. It doesn't matter, Feng Ling replied, looking into Jinwan's eyes. Their eyes met, and she was as honest as ever. Jinwan paused. It didn't matter? If this was a question Feng Ling could not answer, Feng Ling would say that she did not know or remain silent. However, she directly said that it didn't matter. Based on Jinwan's understanding of Feng Ling, she was certain that she was speaking the truth. Could it be that she was thinking too much? Then have you heard of the name Su Shui? Jinwan asked. When Feng Ling heard the word Su, there was a moment of surprise in her eyes. However, when she heard the name behind it, she immediately shook her head. No. All right, there's nothing else. Let's continue eating. Jinwan did not speak further. Jinwan was thinking that this Su Shui was indeed a naive person who liked to be friends with anyone she met. Or Su Shui's real name was not these 3 words, and she had lied about her family background. However, these were all just conjectures. It seemed like she had to find time to take a photo with Su Shui in the next few days. She would bring the photo to Feng Ling to take a look. Perhaps, she might be able to find some answers. On the first day of classes, everything was in order. Professor Lin was indeed an experienced professor. His teaching style was also very suitable for young people. There were more than 40 students in this new class, both male and female. More than half of the students were female, and there weren't many male students. However, most of them were second-generation heirs, and heirs of wealthy families. All of them were wealthy and respectable, and they couldn't be underestimated in the future. In the evening, after class, Jinwan took her books and returned to the dormitory to revise. She had left all the work in the studio to Xia Tian before taking the time to come to T University. These 3 months were very precious to her. You're so hardworking. It's only the first day. Everyone has gone to the entertainment club opposite T University. Aren't you going out for a drink or two? When Bai Wei returned, she saw that Jinwan was actually revising. Bai Wei was different from those pampered daughters of wealthy families. She was a senior executive in a company, and her words were very mature and straightforward. She did not like to be too close to Ling Feifei, but her impression of Jinwan was quite good. She would occasionally chat with Jinwan. I want to but I can't. There's someone at home who doesn't allow me to drink. Jinwan smiled at Bai Wei. She flipped through the book in her hands and furiously took notes. Not even wine? Why are you so strict? Bai Wei said casually. In the blink of an eye, she picked up a book and sat on the bed opposite and began to read. Jinwan did not answer, but raised her eyes to glance at her. Why don't you go? I'm not interested in participating in this kind of activity. They're just a bunch of pampered second-generation rich kids. There's no point in getting along with them. Bai Wei replied and did not say anything else. She lowered her head and continued reading. The dormitory was quiet except for the occasional sound of flipping pages. Jinwan continued writing for a while. When she put down her pen to rest, she glanced at her phone on the table. She had no idea what the man who warned her not to touch a drop of alcohol was doing right now. She thought for a moment, suddenly picked up her phone, took a photo of the notes she had just written, and sent it to him. Hi City Mo Corporation. The black ghost came out of the company's underground parking lot and drove to the square in front. The sound of an incoming message came from his cell phone. Mo Jingshan usually ignored these messages, but at this moment, he took out his cell phone and glanced at it. Seeing that it was a message from Jinwan, the black ghost drove to a spot with less traffic and stopped by the side of the road. He opened the message and saw that it was a basic business management class notebook. The neat and serious handwriting displayed the little woman's seriousness and diligence. His cell phone then rang again. A second message came in. Jinwan. The first day of class. The first set of notes. Mr. Mo, please check. Mo Jingshan's eyes were filled with warmth as he called her. Jinwan did not know if he was busy and did not dare to call. She was leaning against the table, preparing to send another message when the man's call came in. She was startled. She turned back to see that Bai Wei was still reading. Afraid that the call would disturb her, she rushed to grab her phone and ran out of the dormitory like a thief. "Class is over?" The man's calm and clear voice came from the phone. Although his tone was clearly no different from his usual tone, Jinwan's heart was like the surging undercurrents of a calm lake. His simple words had caused her emotions to rise and fall. She only needed a moment of distraction to wish that she could immediately fly back to High City. She softly responded. "What is it? Why are you so depressed? Are you unhappy?" "No. Why didn't you wake me up when you went to the airport that day?" "When I suddenly woke up in the morning, it was already past 8 o'clock. The moment I opened my eyes, I saw that the room was empty. At that time he was already on the plane." She could not call him. After the feeling of disappointment in her heart gradually calmed down, she held her breath. She was angry that he left without saying a word. "Why did I wake you up? Tell you to hug me and cry?" "Jinwan. Who said I would cry?" The man's voice was cold. He smiled faintly. "You don't need to cry. Just one look is enough to make me suffer. I'm afraid I'll regret it on the spot and directly kidnap you back to High City." Since Mo Jingshan could say these words, it proved that he was definitely capable of doing such a thing. However, at that time, if Jinwan had watched him leave, she most likely would not have looked too happy. From time to time, students from other dormitories would pass by the corridor. Jinwan lowered her voice and briefly explained the classes here to Mo Jingshan. As she spoke, she suddenly heard the sound of a car on the other end of the line. She asked, "Are you driving?" "No, the car is parked by the side of the road," Mo Jingshan calmly said. "I'm afraid I'll be distracted if I call Mrs. Mo, so I parked the car early." "I thought you were at the company or at home." Jinwan finally realized that he had just gotten off work. From the sound of the car, she could guess that there was a traffic jam. If he continued to park there, it would be really inconvenient. She said, "You drive back first. I'll continue to take notes. I'll call later." Clearly it wasn't good to keep the car parked there. He did not reject her. His voice was clear and low. "Don't read for too long. Take care of your eyes. Also don't stay up late." I know. Don't worry. Even if you're not by my side to urge me, my lifestyle is still orderly. I'll definitely study well and live a healthy life." Jinwan mischievously responded and hung up. She put down the phone and was about to return to the dormitory when she saw that Su Shui had returned. She was standing at the staircase in front of the corridor, looking in her direction thoughtfully. Chapter 193. Meeting Su Shui's gaze. Jinwan withdrew the smile on her face and placed her phone in her pocket. She calmly glanced at her. "You didn't go with them to the club to play?" "I did, but I came back because there was nothing interesting." Su Shui finally raised an exquisite box in her hands. "Earlier, I bought a lot of desserts outside T University. Let's eat together." Jinwan nodded and entered the dormitory. Without Ling Feifei, the dormitory was much quieter. Su Shui opened the dessert box and distributed the desserts to them. She then naturally sat by Jinwan's bedside and ate the mousse cake in her hands as she tried to find topics to chat with Jinwan. Most of the topics revolved around Jinwan. One moment, she asked Jinwan why she opened a studio related to real estate. The next moment, she asked Jinwan what her family did aside from opening a studio. The next moment, she asked Jinwan why she wanted to study business management. Finally, she casually asked, "Jinwan, who were you talking to on the phone earlier? You were smiling so brightly. The person on the other side of the phone definitely wasn't your parents. It must be your boyfriend or something, right?" Jinwan continued to hold the unfinished notes in her hands. As she read, she calmly said, "After asking so many questions, are you more curious about me or my so-called boyfriend?" As she spoke, Jinwan's gaze shifted to Su Shui's face. Jinwan's face carried a smile, but it also carried an unfathomable sense of distance. Su Shui blinked. "Since there's nothing to do, I'm just casually chatting. I have a cousin whom I've been close to since I was young. She's the same age as you. Perhaps it's because of this that I instinctively feel closer to you." Jinwan raised her brows. "Cousin?" Su Shui nodded. but did not continue on the topic of her so-called cousin. She only said, "Also look, we've all introduced ourselves." Ling Feifei couldn't hide anything, and Bai Wei's company can be easily found online. You're the only one who said that you opened a studio in High City, and didn't say anything else. I'm indeed very curious about you. Hearing these words, Bai Wei finally glanced at Jin Wan. I indeed only have a studio. My background is simple and clean. There's nothing to be curious about. Jin Wan's tone was indifferent. She then glanced at Su Shui. Speaking of which, aren't you the young lady of the Swan Group who specially came from America, more worthy of my curiosity? Su Shui immediately smiled bashfully. I'm not that different from you guys. I just live a little further. Only, Jin Wan raised her brows. It seems like we're all the same. I live a little further. Jin Wan, I just want to get to know you better. I don't have many friends in the country, so I ask too many questions. Don't always keep me at a distance. Jin Wan did not speak. Bai Wei suddenly spoke up. Everyone's personality is different. Jin Wan clearly doesn't wish to say more, yet you keep asking. Why can't you see this clearly? Su Shui's expression faltered. She thought for a moment, and suddenly handed a few desserts to Jin Wan. All right, I won't ask anymore. I'll go read too. She stood up and returned to her own bed. Jin Wan glanced at the desserts Su Shui placed by her bed. She casually picked them up and handed them to Bai Wei. You eat them. Recently, I've lost interest in desserts. My stomach feels uncomfortable after just a few mouthfuls. I keep feeling nauseous. Bai Wei glanced at her and teased. What's there to feel nauseous about? Don't tell me you're pregnant. They didn't know each other very well, so her casual words were just a joke. Jin Wan just smiled at it. Su Shui's gaze abruptly shifted to Jin Wan. Sensing her gaze, Jin Wan could not help but turn to look at her. Don't you want to read? Su Shui paused. Her gaze shifted to her stomach. She picked up the book and asked thoughtfully, Do you feel nauseous when you eat desserts? I'm joking. Jin Wan curved her lips and did not pay her any more attention. Half a month passed by quickly. Jin Wan had almost forgotten about her birthday. By the time she remembered, it was T University's annual bonfire party. The bonfire party was the day before her birthday. It was also the day Jin Wan had originally planned to book a plane ticket back to High City. It was said that not all students had the right to attend. Only students who had been selected by the professors and the school officials could attend the celebration. Jin Wan was preparing to book a plane ticket back to High City when she suddenly received a call from Professor Lin. Professor Lin said that among the new students under him, there were only 10 spots left for the bonfire party. One of them was her. He also said that this spot was difficult to obtain. Once it was confirmed, it could not be changed. Jin Wan could only agree. But this way, she would not be able to return to High City on her birthday. She had originally promised Mo Jingshan, but now that she had changed her mind, she did not know if he would be angered by her. Jin Wan held her phone in a daze for a moment before calling Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan picked up the call and heard the woman stammering on the other end. What are you feeling so guilty about? Can't you even have a proper conversation? Jin Wan could only speak honestly. Earlier, I received a call from Professor Lin. He arranged a spot for me for T University's annual bonfire party. Since I've already arranged it, I can't go. So, I can't return to High City on Saturday. You're not returning to High City this week? Mo Jingshan was in his office, flipping through the documents without raising his head. He spoke calmly into his phone. Even if Professor Lin treats you as his favorite student, you can't snatch me away so blatantly. Do you plan on spending your 21st birthday with me in a house far apart from each other? It's not that. She actually wanted to go back. After so long, this was the first time she had been apart from Mo Jingshan for such a long time. She had long gotten used to working during the day and returning home at night to hug the other party. Now that they were forcibly separated, time had really slowed down. Mo Jingshan placed the documents in his hands down and loosened his collar. After a moment of silence, he asked, What bonfire party? Can't you be absent? The spots are limited. Professor Lin specially reserved a spot for me, and it's really hard to refuse. Once it's decided, it can't be changed. I'm thinking that if it really can't be done, I'll celebrate my birthday on the lunar calendar. I won't celebrate my birthday on the solar calendar. I'll go back next month. Professor Lin had given her so much face. She couldn't possibly reject his good intentions. Do we need to dress up for your bonfire party? There's no need. It's not like it's a banquet. Although Professor Lin's students are all from the upper class, there are many ordinary students in T University. This isn't the school's anniversary. It shouldn't be that grand. The entire student body of T University will be there. More or less, but there should be a limited number of spots. In total, there should only be a few hundred people. A few hundred, the man suddenly said coldly. There are only a dozen or so hedonistic young masters in Professor Lin's class. I've already endured enough to let them stay in the same classroom as you. Are you going to attend the bonfire party with a few hundred people? Chapter 194. On Saturday, the bonfire party started at 6:00 p.m. It was held by the river not far from T University. This river ran through T City, and the wind was chilly at night. It rustled against the lush trees on both sides of the river. Coincidentally, the 4 people from her dormitory were all on the list. Jean Wan was still dressed in her usual clothes, while the other 3 were dressed simply. Wow! I didn't expect this river to be so beautiful. The lights on both sides are beautiful as well. Let's take a photo together. Ling Feifei suggested. Jean Wan had not found an opportunity to take a photo of Su Shiwei. To avoid alerting the enemy, she immediately agreed to this suggestion. After taking the photo, Jean Wan asked Ling Feifei to send her a copy. She saved the photo and confirmed that Su Shiwei's face was clear in the photo before sending it to Feng Ling. That night, 9:00 p.m., Mo Jingshan stood outside the condominium outside T University. Looking at the tightly locked door and the thin layer of dust on the lock, he was certain that Jean Wan had not stayed here for the past half a month. He opened the door and entered. The lights in the room were not turned on. The sky was already dark, and only the neon lights outside the window could be seen. A bonfire party with the theme of students and school had not ended yet. He picked up his phone and called Jean Wan. However, the other party's phone was turned off. Mo Jingshan's brows twitched. He looked into the distance at the lights on both sides of the river that ran through T City. He called again, but her phone was still turned off. He abruptly turned to leave. The moment he stepped out, he saw Feng Ling appear by the elevator. Mr. Mo? Feng Ling was clearly surprised to see him here. Aren't you in High City? When did you come? Mo Jingshan saw that Feng Ling did not follow Jean Wan. He asked mildly, Where's Jean Wan? Mrs. Mo has a bonfire party tonight. I was supposed to go with her, but she took the bus to the river with the people from the school. She called me earlier to say that her phone was almost out of battery, and asked me to come back to get a portable power supply for her. Mo Jingshan coldly said, She already turned off her phone. Is that so? Feng Ling was suspicious. She took out her phone to check. A few minutes ago, Mrs. Mo just sent me a message. Why did it run out of battery so quickly? What message did she send you? Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Feng Ling paused. She was about to say that she was in a hurry to enter the elevator, and hadn't looked at it when the man in front of her abruptly took her phone. Seeing the message from Jean Wan, Mo Jingshan swiped open the screen, and a high-definition photo of the 4 of them appeared on his cell phone. There was a line of words below. Feng Ling, have you seen this person in a white dress before? Mo Jingshan's eyes were fixed on the face of the woman in the white dress. Before Feng Ling could see his expression clearly, the man had already walked to the elevator with a cold and gloomy expression. The man who was usually calm and indifferent was still endlessly cold at this time, and his sharp eyes seemed to be filled with killing intent in an instant. As sharp as Feng Ling was, she immediately sensed something from Mo Jingshan's expression. She immediately rushed to catch up with him. Jean Wan was sitting by the riverside, away from the bustling crowd. Bai Wei brought over a freshly roasted mutton skewer for her. Thank you. Jean Wan received it, picking up a skewer and taking a bite. Bai Wei brought over 2 cans of beer. Jean Wan was still hesitating whether she should drink it or not. At this moment, Bai Wei happened to receive a call, and went to the other side. Jinwon picked up the beer and weighed it in her hand. Drink some? Forget it, it was better not to drink. After all, she had promised Mo Jingxian. But she still wanted to drink some. Just as she was in a dilemma, Su Shui approached from behind. My stomach isn't feeling well. There are too many people by the riverside, and I can't see clearly. Where can I find a public bathroom? Can you accompany me to look for one? Jinwon calmly glanced at her. It's in the forest over there. You can find it yourself if you walk that way. It's too dark in the forest. Come with me. I'm scared. Su Shui held her stomach, her complexion pale. It seemed like her stomach really wasn't feeling well. Jinwon glanced at Bai Wei, who was on the phone, and turned to see Ling Feifei enjoying herself in the crowd. The people she was most familiar with here were the few of them. Su Shui was indeed too embarrassed to ask others to accompany her. Although Jinwon did not like interacting too much with Su Shui, she always felt that this person was strange from head to toe. But after all, they were staying in the same dormitory. Let's go. Jinwon placed the skewers and beer down, standing up and patting her pants. The two walked into the dark forest by the side. The lights by the river could not reach here, and the path ahead was too dark. Jinwon said, My phone's out of battery. Turn it on. Otherwise, we won't be able to see the road clearly. My phone's also out of battery. Su Shui's voice was much softer than usual, as though she was purposely suppressing her voice. Jinwon thought that her stomach was hurting, and did not suspect anything. She reached behind her to support her, and the two of them continued walking in. As the crowd grew further and further away, the surroundings became unbelievably dark. Jinwon clearly remembered that there were lights near the public bathroom. Why were they all off? Jinwon. All of a sudden, Su Shui's voice rang by her side. Jinwon was still wondering what was wrong with the lights when she heard Su Shui's soft voice again. Are you afraid of the dark? Jinwon was about to answer when she felt that something was wrong. She and Su Shui had walked in the dark all the way here. Why was she suddenly asking this now? It was impossible for the lights here to be turned off so coincidentally at this time. They must have been damaged by someone. With this thought, Jinwon's footsteps paused. She was about to turn around to look at Su Shui, when she abruptly heard someone approaching. Hearing the sound, she instinctively wanted to call out. But before she could open her mouth, she was pressed down harshly. Her mouth and nose were also covered with a damp cloth. You guys, what are you doing? You. The surroundings were pitch black. She could not see Su Shui's expression, nor could she see the people around. Chapter 195. In the darkness, there was not a single crack of light to be found. After Jinwon woke up, her eyes were opened in vain, but she could only see darkness. From the moment she woke up, she struggled violently, until she gradually lost all strength. She could only lie there motionlessly. She was lying on a relatively wide bench, her hands behind her back, firmly tied by ropes under the bench. Her feet were also firmly tied to the other end of the bench. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't move at all. Her mouth was sealed with tape, so she couldn't open her mouth to call for help. This kind of situation was pitch black. When she woke up, she even suspected that her rebirth was just an unrealistic dream. Perhaps she was still living in that boundless darkness of her previous life. Or perhaps she was still locked up in some poor and backward mountain village, waiting to be forcefully sold by the villagers. The darkness was frightening. She did not even know how much time had passed. All of a sudden, the sound of messy footsteps approached from outside. Jinwon subconsciously shut her eyes. Creak. The heavy metal door was opened. The sound of two people's footsteps approached. The air was filled with the sweat of an unfamiliar man, causing one to feel disgusted. Jinwon closed her eyes and did not move. Did you use too much medicine on that cloth? Why hasn't this chick woken up yet? Ignore her. Miss Su only told us to kidnap her and send her out when the time is right. Whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with us. She's so pretty. Isn't it too much of a pity to send her over like this? Why don't we play for a bit? Play your head. Miss Su told us to leave T-City immediately after we're done. This chick's background isn't simple. Isn't she just a T University student? What kind of background can she have at such a young age? Don't ask so much. Immediately send her to that bar. If we don't send her there, we won't get a single cent of the remaining 1 million yuan. We don't know who leaked the news, but right now, this area has already been patrolled by police cars many times. Do things cleanly. Since she hasn't woken up yet, it'll save us some trouble. At this moment, Jinwan abruptly opened her eyes. The two tall and strong men were shining flashlights on her body. When they saw her suddenly open her eyes, they seemed to be startled. Jinwan narrowed her eyes slightly in the glare of the flashlight, but her mouth kept making woo-woo sounds. Big brother, does she want to talk? Woo-woo-woo. Jinwan made a few more sounds. Hearing that her voice seemed to have a different pitch, as if she really wanted to say something, the two men looked at each other and chose to ignore her. You woke up so quickly. How troublesome. Hurry up and take him away. Woo-woo-woo. Jinwan's eyes widened as she stared at them. She couldn't move her hands, and the tape on her mouth prevented her from saying a word. She could only stare at them with hope in her eyes and keep repeating those three tones. Big brother, she really seems to be saying something. The other man finally glanced at Jinwan. As Jinwan continued to struggle and make those few tones, he abruptly tore off the tape on her mouth. A piercing pain came from her lips. Jinwan couldn't care less. In such a situation, she couldn't shout, or else it would only bring about a fatal disaster. She took a deep breath and said, How much money did the people who kidnapped me promise to pay you? Let me go. I can pay double. Those people still owe you 1 million yuan, right? Let me go now, and I can give it to you immediately. She had just finished speaking when the man abruptly sealed the tape on her mouth again. Woo-woo. Jinwan stared hard at them, her mouth still repeating the same tone. Big brother, The man had a knife scar on his face. He coldly glanced at Jinwan. You want to live, right? Jinwan hurriedly nodded, her gaze sincere. She was certain that if these two were only doing this for money, perhaps there would be a chance. You have money to give us? The man still had a doubtful expression. Jinwan nodded again, making an woo sound. It was a confirmation. The money Miss Su gave us is her share. If you want to buy your life from our hands, it won't be as simple as just paying double. The man suddenly revealed a cold and greedy smile. He shone the flashlight on Jinwan's body, and finally shone the blinding light on her eyes. She had no choice but to close her eyes and turn her head to avoid it. He said in a rough voice, Miss Su wanted us to send you to T-City's largest underground bar. With your looks, you can easily sell for 2 million yuan a night there. After that, you can be sold to a smuggling ship in the Philippines and continue to earn a sum. Just our share is already quite a bit. If you want to buy your life from our hands, how much more can you pay? Jinwan's expression faltered. The two men's greedy expressions were too obvious. She tried her best to maintain her composure as she stared at their faces, wondering where their bottom line was. Big brother, she seems to be intentionally stalling for time. The moment the person by the side spoke, the man coldly narrowed his eyes and stared at Jinwan. Don't think about waiting for someone to save you just because you're wasting time. Right now your life is in our hands. I'll offer 5 million yuan. Will you give it? Jinwan's expression faltered for a moment before she nodded. Her gaze was sincere. How? A check. This man was clearly much more decisive and calm than the person by the side. He did not give Jinwan any chance to speak or shout for help. He only observed Jinwan's expression, watching for her to nod or shake her head. Jinwan nodded. You. The man by the side immediately stared at her with bright eyes, as though he had seen a god of fortune. The two exchanged glances, and suddenly pulled her up from the chair. The moment Jinwan's hands regained their freedom, the man who had been conversing with her the entire time took out a blank check from his pocket. The man pressed Jinwan onto the ground forcefully and tugged on one of her hands. He stuffed a pen into her hands. If you want your life, sign the check immediately. 5 million yuan. Account name and amount. Write it for me right now. Jinwan was pressed onto the ground. She stared at the blank check in front of her, and suddenly felt like cursing. The two of them were clearly repeat kidnappers. It was clear that they were too familiar with the ways of this rich young master. The few sentences they exchanged clearly showed that they had no intention of letting her off. Instead, they were trying to swindle more money out of the victim. They actually carried around this kind of blank check, from who knows which bank they obtained it from. The hope and vitality that had just been ignited instantly dissipated. She lay stiffly on the ground, unmoving. She held the pen in her hand, but she stared at it intently. She refused to sign a single word. Chapter 196. The bones in Jean Wan's hand were about to break. She endured the pain and stared at the check, unwilling to move. The man standing behind suddenly pulled out a sharp knife, lowering his voice to threaten her. You only have two choices. Sign the check, and we'll leave this knife to you. You can find a chance to cut the rope and escape. 5 million to buy a chance to escape. Or we can use this knife to cut the tendons in your arms and legs. Or we can cut your face piece by piece. Sign or not. Choose. Jean silently furrowed her brows. 5 million to buy a knife? However, these two people were not joking at all. The back of her hand was about to break. Although they were utterly heartless, the current situation was one of survival of the fittest. In the world of desperados, life was too cheap. She abruptly raised her eyes and glared at the man who was stepping on the back of her hand. The man saw her gaze and moved his foot away. He tossed the pen back to her hand and ordered, Sign. 5 million, not a single cent less. Jean Wan glanced at the knife in the other man's hand. The man also tossed the knife back to her. His meaning was clear. If she dared to sign, they would dare to give the knife to her. Whether or not she could seize the chance to escape was entirely up to her. Jean Wan hesitated for a moment. She slowly moved her hand that was aching and numb from being stepped on earlier. She picked up the pen and signed the check. As she signed, she thought about what had happened. Her previous suspicions of Su Shui were correct. The other party did not come with good intentions. They pretended to be naive to approach her. If they were not inquiring about her, they were observing her every move. After hiding by her side for more than half a month, they indeed harbored evil intentions. Seeing that she had written everything she needed to write on the check, the two men finally pulled her up from the ground. Jean Wan staggered, unable to stand steadily. Her hands were once again tied behind her. Although her body had left the bench, she was not in a state of freedom. She wondered if she would encounter two scoundrels who had no sense of morality at all. When the man in front tied her hands behind her back, he folded the foldable knife and stuffed it into her palm. He then tied her hands behind her back in a very clever way, so that no one could see what was in her hands. I've already given you the saber. Don't say that we don't follow the rules of the martial world. The man tied her up tightly, looking as if he was satisfied with the 5 million yuan. He lowered his voice and said, Miss Su's people are guarding outside. We have to send you to the bar now. After we send you there, we'll leave. If the rope near your middle finger and index finger is cut, you'll be able to untie it yourself. What do you think? Was the 5 million yuan well spent? If Jean Wan's mouth wasn't taped, she really wanted to scold them. She suppressed her fear and anger, tightly holding onto the foldable knife in her hand. She then coldly stared at the two men. Stop glaring. It's rare to see someone as tactful as you. That Miss Su's background isn't small. She knows where our hideout is. If it was any other brother, they wouldn't sell out all the brothers in their hideout for a mere 5 million yuan. Seeing that Jean Wan was obediently allowing them to tie her up and did not struggle, the man spoke again and signaled to the man beside him with his eyes. When the two men brought Jean Wan out, before she could clearly see her surroundings, her eyes were abruptly covered with a black cloth. The fear of falling into darkness once more caused her to lose confidence. She frantically struggled, but the two men had already brought her to a car. There should be someone in the car. They no longer had the patience they had when tying her up. They harshly scolded her and pushed her with force. Jean Wan abruptly felt as though she had been pushed into someone else's hands. Could it be that these people were Miss Su's people? What exactly was Su Shui's background? Her eyes were covered and could not see anything. Suddenly, she was pushed into the car by those people. Outside T-City's largest underground bar, there was an endless stream of cars and neon lights. Among the rows of cars, Su Shui sat in a black Audi. From afar, she watched as Jinwan was dragged out of a van by those people. She then watched as Jinwan staggered as she was dragged into the bar. Only then did her lips slowly curve up. Her seemingly innocent face was dyed with sharp viciousness. After confirming that Jinwan had already been brought in and would not be able to easily escape, she finally called for the driver to drive away. The black Audi drove out of the street near the bar. On the road, Su Xue's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and excitedly picked up the call. "Cousin, you're calling at this time. Is it to celebrate that I've helped you settle the matter?" Hearing the voice from the other side of the phone, Su Xue smiled widely. "You're still worried about me? Of course I won't take her life. What I want to do is to help you destroy her." In the car, only Su Xue's complacent voice could be heard. "Of course if she dies, Mo Jingshan will only remember her forever. You won't have the chance to return to his side, and his heart won't be able to hold a place for anyone other than a dead person. But if she's destroyed, living in such a filthy state in this world, sooner or later, he'll lose his appetite for her. That Jinwan is more vigilant than we thought. We were almost discovered by her. When she heard that I came from Los Angeles, she seemed to be especially sensitive to Los Angeles. I think she already knew of your existence a long time ago. No matter how vigilant she is, didn't she still end up in my hands? If it weren't for the fact that Uncle has grounded you at home, and you personally came from America, this show would have been even more exciting. If Mo Jingshan hadn't issued a warning to the Su family, Uncle wouldn't have grounded you. Even I feel it's a pity that you missed this good show. But don't worry. Leave this to me. I'll definitely beat that Jinwan until there's no place left unscathed. I'll completely lose to you both physically and mentally." Su Xue was still talking to her phone. All of a sudden, the car she was sitting in screeched to a halt. She had just hung up the phone when she lost her grip and abruptly dropped it. She raised her head and was about to scold the driver with a cold expression when the corner of her eyes suddenly paused. Chapter 197. It was a black off-road vehicle. It decisively forced her car to stop. Su Xue's hand paused as she was about to pick up her phone. She stared ahead and suddenly said, "Drive." The driver said hesitantly, "But Miss Su, the car in front. I told you to drive. Drive away immediately. Hurry, go around that car." Su Xue ordered anxiously. The driver could only start the engine and quickly reverse the car. He then immediately turned the car around and drove in the opposite direction. Su Xue picked up her phone and gripped it tightly. She stared at the off-road vehicle in the rearview mirror. Seeing that the car was approaching at a merciless speed, she rushed to shout, "Drive faster! Faster!" The driver sped up. His gaze was fixed on the car behind. Silently, he sensed a murderous intent approaching and instinctively stepped on the accelerator. As they sped up, the black off-road vehicle also sped up. When they reached an empty road, the black off-road vehicle sped up even more. Seeing that she could not shake it off, Su Xue furrowed her brows and decided to give up the chase. She ordered the driver to stop the car in front. However, the moment the car stopped, Su Xue thought that the black off-road vehicle behind would also stop. At the very least, it would not hit her. However, the black off-road vehicle did not stop, nor did it slow down. Instead, it sped up again. By the time Su Xue reacted, the car had already rushed over. Ah! Pung! It was a loud sound that caused people's hearts to tremble. It was a huge collision. Su Xue's calm expression instantly turned pale. She sat in the car in a daze. Her car, which had been parked by the road, was forcefully knocked 2 or 3 meters away. The safety barrier by the side of the road had been completely deformed by the car. If the other party had used a little more force, her car would have rolled down the safety barrier. This road was lined with T-City's rivers. They were very high and very deep. If her car rolled down, she would definitely die. Her face was pale. She stared in disbelief at the dent in front of her car. After several seconds of silence, Su Xue slowly raised her head. She stared in shock at the unscathed off-road vehicle. The direction of the collision was so precise, and the hardest part of their car was used as a sharp blade. Was the person driving the car the bodyguard Mo Jingshan, had arranged to stay by Jinwan's side. Or, Mo Jingxian himself? Su Shuai stared ahead with a startled expression. When the door of the black off-road vehicle opened, and Mo Jingxian stepped out of the car, all the blood in her body turned ice-cold. T-City's underground bar. When the door of the stuffy room was opened again, in just a few minutes, Jinwan was already suffocated by the stuffy air, and her body was covered with a layer of sweat. When the door was opened, she subconsciously raised her head. Although her eyes were covered with a black cloth, she still listened carefully to the voice on the other side. Is that her? An unfamiliar and rough voice sounded in front of them. The people around him echoed, and it seemed like someone was calling that person boss. Jinwan furrowed her brows. She was not very familiar with the underground bars in T-City, but under normal circumstances, the people in these bars were all involved in illegal activities. It was impossible for them to be good people. These people mostly walked on the edge of the illegal world, and had some connections with the underworld. That Su Shuai was even able to contact these kinds of people. Jinwan could not help but wonder what exactly they did in Los Angeles. Her looks aren't bad. It's been a long time since I've seen such a beautiful one. Her skin is also so fair. She can definitely be sold for a good price. Bring her over. Afterward, someone came over and removed the black cloth from Jinwan's face. Jinwan narrowed her eyes. She was momentarily unable to adjust to the light, and was unable to see the person clearly. Her ponytail was abruptly undone, and her long hair scattered messily across her shoulders. Very good. She looks even more beautiful and delicate like this. Wipe her face clean. We'll start selling her in 10 minutes. Jinwan forced her eyes open and looked forward. She could only see a man with a knife scar on his face, dressed in a black trench coat. He had a cigar in his mouth, and was commenting on her figure and appearance. After giving a few more instructions, he turned around and left. There were only a few people who appeared to be bodyguards left in the room. One of them suddenly brought an ice-cold towel over, and wiped her face harshly. Jinwan's face hurt from the rubbing. She glared at them, but the tape on her mouth was still there. What are you glaring at? Behave yourself. The person who wiped her face coldly reprimanded. He then pinched her chin and said in a rascally manner, "This little girl's looks are indeed not bad. After we sell her for a good price tonight, I wonder if boss will bestow her to us to play with for a few days, before selling her to the Philippines. Look at this little face, it's indeed so fair." As he spoke, he touched Jinwan's face, and acted as though he was about to kiss her. Jinwan shifted her face away in disgust. Her eyes were filled with anger and disgust as she glared at him. Damn it, why don't you glare at me again? This old man will dig out your eyes. The man abruptly spat on the ground. He was extremely dissatisfied with her stubborn temper. If boss had not said that he would sell her for a good price later, he really wished he could rip off her clothes right now. Jinwan continued to glare at him. The man used the towel to wipe her face and neck harshly again. He used a lot of force and rubbed her pale skin until it was slightly red. He then stopped and called for the others to bring her out. Afterward, just like in her previous life, Jinwan was like a fish on a chopping board. She was tied up and thrown into the bar stands. The clothes on her shoulders were slightly torn, revealing her fair shoulders. Her hair fell down to cover them, half covering her face. Her eyes, which were sealed with tape, tried their best to hide the fear and helplessness in them. She stared coldly at the people in the bar, and attracted the attention of most of them. Afterward, she did not pay attention to how much those people called out. She only knew that after the buyer was confirmed, she was directly brought down. She was thrown into the bar's basement. Her body was still tied up, and she was curled up on a single bed with a thin blanket. Although it was a basement, it was clearly prepared for those lovers. It was a very small room, but the decorations were very high-end. It was completely in the European style. Even the bed she was lying on was not cheap. There were also all sorts of waxes, candlesticks, whips, handcuffs, and other utensils at this moment. The only light in the basement was a dim wall lamp. She narrowed her eyes slightly, carefully listening to the sounds outside. Chapter 198. Her bound hands were drenched in cold sweat. After confirming that the voices outside were far away, Jinwon carefully turned the folding knife she had been holding in her hand for a long time. As it turned, the 5 million yuan check she signed was not completely useless. The person who bound her hands was indeed skillful in tying the rope around her wrists. It could be said that he had been quite righteous. She twisted her wrist forcefully, and gradually, there was some space between her two hands. Then, she slowly opened the folding knife. Remembering what the man had said before, she used the sharp blade to cut the rope between her index finger and middle finger forcefully. With her hands tied, it was really inconvenient for her to move. She had already spent a lot of time and effort on these actions. Right now, her body was covered in a layer of sweat, and she could not use the strength to cut the rope. She could only use the knife to grind it bit by bit. After grinding for more than 2 minutes, the rope broke. She did not dare to relax. Bit by bit, she used the intricate knot on the rope to untie it completely. Once her hands were free, she quickly tore off the tape on her mouth. Her mouth was most likely torn red. She endured the pain and held her breath. She bent down and used the knife to cut the rope around her feet. When she finally regained her freedom, she carefully stood up bit by bit. Her legs were already numb from being tied up. She staggered to the door and listened to the movements outside. It was as though these people were certain that she would not be able to escape, and did not send anyone to guard the door. Earlier, when she was brought in, she knew that there was a narrow and dimly lit corridor outside. At the end of the corridor was a staircase, and up the staircase was a hidden door in the corner of the bar that was blocked by a sound system. Jinwon tried to push the door, and found that it was locked. No wonder there was no one guarding outside. She rushed to remove a thin black hair clip from the top of her head. In her previous life, perhaps this was the only time she could thank her previous life for her miserable escape experience. Everything in her previous life had taught her a lot. At the very least, she could open a simple door like this. It was not a security door, and she only needed a little time to open it. Jinwon tried placing the hair clip by the doorknob toward the keyhole inside. She used force to poke the thinner side of the hair clip into the keyhole. Because she did not dare to make too much noise, she could only carefully push it back and forth in the keyhole. This basement only had a simple wooden door, and the lock was also a simple single lock. Time passed bit by bit. The anxiety in Jinwon's heart grew heavier and heavier. Every time she heard footsteps coming from outside, she would grab the hair clip in fright, and turn to hide behind the door in a defensive posture. She did this countless times, and finally, the hair clip found its place in the keyhole. The sound of the door being unlocked was very soft. She gently released a breath, pinning the hair clip back on her head, and opened the door handle. The moment the door opened, the deafening roar of the bar instantly assaulted her ears. Jinwon stuck her head out and observed the surroundings. She then quietly closed the door and pressed against the wall. She lowered her head and tried her best not to be captured by the surveillance cameras in the corner. After much difficulty, she finally reached the staircase. All of a sudden, she saw a figure approaching. She was startled, and immediately turned around to see that the door to the room beside her was not locked. She rushed to enter that door and leaned against it. Her heart beat heavily as she listened to the movements outside. The room before her was not lit. However, when she opened the door earlier, she saw that the layout of this room was almost the same as the one she was in earlier. It seemed like every room in this underground corridor was the same. She was considering how to escape. There were people all around the bar. She did not know which were the customers and which were the staff of the bar. How could she avoid them? All of a sudden, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. As she listened to the sound, the hair on Jinwon's body stood on end. The footsteps seemed to be heading toward the room she was in earlier. There was a sudden silence inside, and this silence gradually made her panic. As expected, as the strange silence passed, she heard an angry and suppressed voice. She shouldn't have escaped too far. Go look for her immediately. She actually brought something that can cut the rope? Which bastard kidnapped her? Damn it! Go look for her. Then the sound of footsteps outside gradually increased. It was somewhat hurried, and at the same time, the surrounding rooms were kicked open one by one. Jinwon furrowed her brows and carefully hid under a black shelf by the side. She squatted down and held her breath. Look in every room. As the footsteps approached, someone abruptly kicked open the door of this room. The lights in the room were turned on. As if they had been inspecting the other rooms along the way, they hurriedly glanced around the room, turned off the lights, closed the door, and went to check the other rooms. Perhaps they did not expect Jinwon to hide in such a close place. The burly men were in a hurry to check, and did not notice Jinwon hiding under the table. Jinwon released a light breath, and crawled out from under the table. She listened to the movements outside, and then ran to the door, pressing her ear against it. She didn't know what time it was, but she heard the footsteps of those people getting further and further away. It seemed like they had gone out to search, and didn't continue to stay in the underground corridor. She waited for a while before carefully opening the door. Then she slowly walked to the staircase. Most of the people in this bar were their men. How was she going to escape? Climbing up the stairs, she saw the neon lights in the bar. Jinwon bent down and carefully pushed open the door behind the stereo system. She looked out and saw all kinds of people outside. She lowered her head and covered her face with her loose hair. She followed the corner of the door and walked to the side. When a waiter approached, she hurriedly squatted down and hid behind a sofa. She then turned to look at the waiter. He was holding a tray and wine in his hand, and was talking to the waiter by the side. Clearly, the flashing lights here made it difficult for people to see clearly. The waiter did not notice Jinwon. Jinwon turned around, maintaining her squatting position, as she ran to the back of the other sofa. The lights in the bar flickered incessantly. Taking advantage of the dimming of the lights, she successfully leaped over without attracting anyone's attention. She walked along the back of these sofas, and came to a place with fewer people. She looked out and planned to run out in one breath. Chapter 199. Unfortunately, there were people guarding the entrance of the bar. Jinwon wanted to rush out in a fit of anger, but that was only a thought. The moment her figure appeared, no matter how fast she ran, the moment she was discovered by the people at the door, they nimbly came over and pressed her down. Just as she was about to cry for help, they covered her mouth and dragged her back. Jinwon could not break free. In the blink of an eye, she was brought back to the basement and thrown onto the ground. The pain on her body could not compare to the hatred in her heart. All her earlier struggles were futile. She raised her head, and saw that the boss with the knife scar on his face was actually here. He stepped forward and grabbed her hair. Jinwon endured it, and did not cry out in pain. However, her body was forced to lean forward due to the tug of her hair. The boss's expression was ugly as he dragged her, and threw her harshly onto the bed. You're the first woman to have the ability to escape from the basement. The boss coldly glanced at her before ordering the people behind him. Watch her. When the buyer is done drinking, don't let her escape again. If she escapes again, don't even think of living. Afterward, the door was locked once more. There were already people guarding the door. Jinwon glared at the door, her hands gripping the thin blanket beneath her tightly. Right now, her hands and feet were no longer tied up, but there was no way she could leave this room. Not long after, the so-called buyer, a fat, bespectacled middle-aged man in his 40s, came in. The moment he saw Jinwon, he put on a wretched smile, and approached her step by step. Jinwon was startled, taking advantage of the fact that the guards had left, and that the bespectacled man had drunk too much. She grabbed the lamp on the bedside table, and threw it at him. Your temper isn't small, the bespectacled man said as he suddenly took off his clothes, revealing his plump upper body. Jinwon was disgusted by the sight. She leaned against the wall, but felt that this scene was extremely familiar. In her previous life, she was sold to a father and son's home in that poor mountain village. That father and his foolish son had once stripped naked and forced her into a corner. Even though she had escaped, even though she had mutilated herself and covered herself in blood, so that they couldn't get close to her or touch her, those terrifying memories still lingered in her mind. Jinwon didn't want to be affected by the terrible memories of her previous life. She tried to calm herself down, but the white flesh in front of her still made her nauseous. Just as she suddenly leaned against the wall and retched, the bespectacled middle-aged man suddenly rushed over, grabbed her hair, and pulled her close to him. As soon as Jean Wan's whole body was pressed against his white flesh, her hair stood on end. "Let me go. Little bitch, I heard that you wanted to escape just now. I spent more than 2 million to buy you a few nights. And you dare to run? Do you believe that this old man won't kill you right now?" The other party ignored Jean Wan's struggles and abruptly threw her harshly back onto the bed. He threw her with too much force, and Jean Wan was thrown to the innermost position against the wall. Her head knocked heavily against the wall, and she instantly felt dizzy. Her vision darkened, and she raised her hand to touch her forehead. When she lowered her hand, she saw a patch of blood on her palm. The wall was decorated with all kinds of small pebbles, so it wasn't smooth. Her impact was not light either. Seeing the blood on her palm, Jean Wan's vision darkened. She forced herself to sit against the wall, and in the blink of an eye, she saw him pouncing toward her. Her heart instantly beat wildly, but the moment she tried to move, she felt dizzy and could not move. She could only force her body to move slightly, but it was completely useless. "Don't touch me!" Scram. At this moment, Jean Wan did not have the strength to struggle. Even sitting steadily was difficult. The sound of clothes being forcefully torn came from the air. She cried out in protest, but she suddenly felt the side of the bed sink. The bespectacled middle-aged man was pressing down on her with his fat body that was about to ooze oil. The bespectacled man took advantage of the fact that she did not have the strength to dodge and saw the blood flowing from her head. The smell of blood and her white skin stimulated his desires and senses. He frantically pressed her down on the bed, pressing down on her. He lowered his head to nibble on the alluring white skin on her neck. Jean Wan felt a wave of disgust. Her heart harshly contracted as she screamed, "Don't!" A small portion of her clothes had been torn open. The buttons on the front of her body popped open like beans. Her clothes were suddenly wide open. Even though she was still wearing a tight-fitting camisole underneath, she still felt a chill on her upper body. Both her hands were held by her sides. She did her best to curl up and kick him away. Her lips were already bitten hard by herself, and they turned purple. Her entire body trembled violently. The scene of her struggling on the bed by her father in her previous life overlapped with the scene before her. Jean Wan wanted to calm down and protect herself, but she could not endure the double stimulation. Her entire body was on the verge of breaking down and screaming, "Smelly whore! You're quite strong." The bespectacled man pressed down on her. He lowered his head and was about to tear off her clothes. Jean Wan abruptly turned her head and bit down on his ear. She used the strength to bite off his ear. Ah! In pain, he abruptly pushed her away. He raised his hand and gave her a harsh slap. Half of Jean Wan's face was in so much pain that she lost consciousness. The dizziness in her head intensified. He abruptly grabbed her hair, looked at the blood on her forehead and the corner of her mouth, put down his hand that was covering her ear, and slapped the same side of her face harshly. Seeing that half of her face was already swollen, he finally put on an expression that said he wanted to trample her to death. Taking advantage of the fact that she no longer had the strength to struggle, he grabbed a corner of the blanket and stuffed it into her mouth to prevent her from biting him again. Jean Wan's breathing was heavy. Looking at the disgusting face and white flesh in front of her, she suddenly retched. Suddenly, she heard the sound of police sirens near the bar. Jean Wan thought she was hearing things. Her weak body was pressed against the bed by the bespectacled man. He tugged at her hair with one hand and tugged at her jeans with the other. Because the zipper of her pants was slightly tight, he used both hands to tug at it while cursing. Jean Wan wanted to get up and push him away, but she really could not muster up any strength. Just as the zipper was pulled open, the bespectacled man's eyes brightened. He scolded her again, calling her a smelly whore. He used force to pull down her pants. All of a sudden, a loud pung came from the tightly shut basement door. It was kicked open. Her vision was blurry. Jean Wan did not even have the strength to turn her head to look. She could only see Mo Jingshan's face from the corner of her eye. Chapter 200. The bespectacled man's hand was still pressed against Jean Wan's body, tugging on the zipper of her pants without letting go. This unbearably filthy scene caused her blood to turn cold. When she turned to meet Emo Jingshin's gaze, she felt as though she had fallen into an ice cave. Emo Jingshin's clear eyes were already filled with a storm that was akin to a landslide or tsunami. Jinwon was dazed for a moment. Wasn't he still in High City? Why was he in T-City? Could she have been so agitated that she was hallucinating? However, she could not speak. She could only stare in that direction with a pair of blank and empty eyes. It was as though it was the only warm light in the darkness of despair. It was as though it had saved her from the terror of her previous lives, allowing her to finally breathe. She could barely see how he had come over. She only knew that the bespectacled man on top of her suddenly cried out in pain. The sound of bones breaking rang out, as though someone had twisted his arm. She tried her best to focus, and saw that Emo Jingshin was within arm's reach. His cold eyes did not even blink as he twisted his arm, throwing the wretched bespectacled man off the bed. She felt her body lighten, and in an instant, she felt a familiar coat with a clean and refreshing smell covering her body. Jinwon closed her eyes tiredly, forcing her tears back. By her ears, the bespectacled man's pained cries rang out one after another. She did not know what Emo Jingshin was doing, nor did she wish to look. Right now, even if some people here were to lose their lives, she would not care about the law or human nature. The man fell to the ground and was kicked again. He was kicked 2 meters away and slammed into the wall. His head slammed heavily against the cobblestone wall, and he cried out in pain. His face was flushed red from the pain, and he pointed shakily at the man who had suddenly barged in. He wanted to speak, but the sound of the door opening drowned him out. Feng Ling rushed in. When she saw the scene inside, she immediately understood something. She was about to enter when she suddenly heard Emo Jingshin's cold voice. "Close the door." Feng Ling glanced at Ji Nuan, who was lying on the bed, and subconsciously closed the door behind her, cutting off the gazes of the police outside. Ji Nuan was still in a daze when she was suddenly supported up. She opened her eyes to see Emo Jingshin's face. She wanted to ask why he had come to T-City, but when the words reached her lips, the slightly dried blood on the corner of her lips and her swollen face caused her to furrow her brows. Before she could speak, she heard Emo Jingshin whisper by her ear, "If it hurts, don't speak. I'm here." Although his voice was cold and low, he was gently coaxing and comforting her. At the same time, he wrapped the upper half of her body tightly with the coat she was wearing. He then raised his hand to push aside the hair on her forehead that was stained with blood. When he saw the wound on her head, he gently turned her face to check the palm marks on her face. The killing intent in his eyes was obvious. Although Jinwon knew that she was out of danger, her body was still trembling instinctively. All the struggle and fear from before were still spreading in her body and mind. She wanted to calm herself down, but the scenes from her previous life kept dominating her rational nerves. Her body was trembling, her hands were trembling, her eyes opened and closed, and her eyes were bloodshot. Her eyelashes were trembling, and she tried hard to hold back the tears that were on the verge of falling. Emo Jingshin held her trembling body tightly, gently caressing her hair mixed with blood and sweat as he whispered, "Don't be afraid. I'm here in front of you. It's all over. Be good and close your eyes. Don't listen. Don't look." Jinwon did not move. Emo Jingshin raised his hand and gently covered her eyes. "Don't be afraid, okay?" Feng Ling saw Jinwon's sorry figure and the blood on her head, and abruptly kicked the middle-aged bespectacled man's crotch harshly. The subsequent scream caused Jinwon, who was leaning against Emo Jingshin's arms, to tremble. It was as though every time she heard this disgusting man scream, she would be stimulated in a different way. "Cripple him and gag his mouth. He's too noisy." Emo Jingshin saw that Jinwon could not take any stimulation right now and sternly ordered. Feng Ling quickly grabbed a piece of clothing on the ground, rolled it into a ball, and stuffed it into the man's mouth. She then stepped on his leg, and when he kept groaning in pain, she gave him a roundhouse kick on the head. Right now, only muffled cries of pain could be heard in the basement. The bespectacled man's head was covered in blood and sweat. In the end, he leaned against the corner of the wall and fell to the ground. He looked at the short-haired woman in front of him with a frightened expression. He trembled and tried to move back, but was still kicked harshly by Feng Ling. This time the kick landed on his abdomen. The bespectacled man was in so much pain that his eyeballs almost popped out. Following that, there was the sound of his other arm bone being broken. Even though his mouth was gagged, the miserable groans were enough to tell what kind of inhumane torture and revenge he was currently enduring. Jinwan closed her eyes and leaned against Emo Jingshan's chest. Her eyes were covered by him, and she could not see anything here. However, the red and swollen patch on her pale face was still shocking. Miserable groans followed one after another. Jinwan's hand suddenly touched the folding knife that she had previously thrown by the bedside. Her movements faltered, and she suddenly gripped the knife tightly. In a hoarse voice she said, "Jing Shun, put me down." Emo Jingshan glanced at her and released her. Although Jinwan was in a sorry state, and her head was covered in blood, with Emo Jingshan's clothes draped over her, she still felt a special sense of security. She turned her eyes toward the bespectacled man, who had been tortured to the point where he wished he was dead. She abruptly got off the bed. Feng Ling turned back to look at her. She saw that Jinwan was staggering and could barely stand. She rushed over to support her, but was stopped by Emo Jingshan's gaze. Seeing that Emo Jingshan did not move to stop her, Feng Ling faltered and took a step back. As expected, Jinwan opened the folding knife in her hand. Her reddened eyes stared at the disgusting man in the corner, who was barely breathing. Seeing the white, fleshy flesh on his body, the scenes of that small village in her previous life flashed before her eyes. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she abruptly pounced forward and ruthlessly stabbed the knife in her hand into his palm. The bespectacled man's entire body convulsed in pain. He opened his bloodshot eyes and stared at her in disbelief. This was the hand that had ripped off her clothes earlier. Jinwan forcefully pulled out the knife and stabbed it into the base of his thigh. Seeing blood gurgling out, her heart that was filled with suppressed fear finally felt a little better. She continued to brandish the knife in her hand. Her eyes did not even blink. Not only did she stab once, she stabbed again and again. Even when the bespectacled man's entire body was covered in a pool of blood, she still did not stop. Old Emo. Feng Ling watched this scene and wanted to step forward. However, she saw that although Jinwan's stabs were extremely vicious, most of them were only stabbing the man's legs, hands, and arms. She did not injure any vital parts. Chapter 201. Since she needed to vent, he would let her vent. After all, Mr. Emo was here. No one could touch a single hair on her. Even when his entire body was covered in blood, Jinwan's eyes were bloodshot as she continued stabbing him with the knife. Outside, the sound of the police knocking on the door could be heard. Emo Jingshan abruptly stood up and walked over to Jinwan's back, pulling her into his embrace. He pressed her tightly against his chest, forcefully stopping her from charging forward. He bent down to whisper by her ear, "All right, that's enough." Jinwan's eyes were still bloodshot as she glared at the man who was convulsing in pain and had no strength to stand up. She gritted her teeth and glared at him. Emo Jingshan seized the opportunity before the police knocked on the door and snatched the knife from her hand, throwing it to the ground. Jinwan seemed to have lost her mind. She struggled desperately to break free from his embrace and continued to charge toward the man. Emo Jingshan pressed her down. "Wan, calm down." Jinwan did not listen and continued to struggle. Emo Jingshan abruptly turned her around, forcing her to face him. His deep, black eyes stared at her. "Jinwan." After seeing Emo Jingshan's face clearly, Jinwan's movements stiffened. She no longer struggled and only stared at him in a daze. Her bloodshot eyes stared into his black ones. His heavy voice carried a hint of coaxing by her ear, calming her agitated and violent emotions. "I'll make them pay the price they deserve. Those who shouldn't be breathing won't be spared. Right now, you need to calm down and rest. If you're injured, you need to go see a doctor. Don't make me worry. Be obedient." Jinwan stared at him for a long while before softly leaning into his embrace. She closed her eyes, her head drooping weakly against his chest. "Mrs. Emo." Seeing that she had fainted, Feng Ling furrowed her brows. Her gaze was filled with worry and heartache. Emo Jingshan did not speak. He wrapped Jinwon tightly with his jacket and carried her up by the waist. His cold eyes glanced at the half-dead man covered in blood on the ground. Cooperate fully with the police's investigation. Capture all the hidden gangs in this underground bar. Before dawn, I want none of them to be spared. Fengling nodded and did not speak further. She watched as Mo Jingshan carried Jinwon and was about to leave when she suddenly said, "Mr. Mo, Miss Sue's cousin." Hearing these words, Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened slightly. He used an extremely cold voice to say, "You don't have to interfere in America's Sue family's matters. I have my own plans on how to deal with people who refuse to mend their ways." Fengling understood the hidden meaning in his words and nodded. Since the Sue family did not take Mo Jingshan's warning to heart, then no matter how powerful the Sue family's background was, they would not have peace in the future. When the police rushed in and saw this scene, they also saw the middle-aged bespectacled man covered in blood on the ground. None of them expected this to happen. When they saw Mo Jingshan carrying Jinwon, whose face was pale and head was covered in blood, out, none of them dared to stop him. Only one of the police officers approached, his expression trembling with fear and concern. "Mr. Mo, the underground bar caused such a ruckus on a street, and T-City's police didn't even put on an act to control this place. Did they think that T-City's sky is high and the emperor is far away, and no one would be able to investigate?" Mo Jingshan threw down the words in a heavy voice. "T-City's police force is worthy of suspicion." The police officer's expression immediately stiffened. "Mr. Mo, don't worry. This bar and everything that happened today will all be recorded. We will definitely give you a satisfactory answer." Mo Jingshan carried the unconscious Jinwon in his arms and walked out through the path that the police had automatically opened up. He walked up from the basement. Inside the bar, the owner with a knife scar on his face and his subordinates were all restrained by the police. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at the so-called bar boss. "You dare to touch my woman? Are you tired of living?" Mo Jingshan's voice seemed to be coated with a layer of frost. The bar boss did not make a sound. When he learned that the woman he brought in today was actually the wife of the great Mo Corporation's CEO, he knew that it was useless for him to walk this path for so many years. Today he was really finished. By the time Jinwon was brought out of the bar, it was already late at night. There were more than 10 police cars parked outside the bar. Even though she was unconscious, she did not feel safe. Hearing the sirens of the police cars outside, she closed her eyes and silently furrowed her brows. Half an hour later, at the hospital, a group of helpless doctors exchanged glances before turning to look at the woman, who was curled up on the bed. Her head was still covered in blood, and her body was trembling uncontrollably. 10 minutes ago, this Miss G was sent in. She was instructed to clean up her wounds and check if there were any other injuries or problems on her body. Because the police had followed along, the gentleman who brought her in was currently negotiating with the police outside the consultation room. However, this Miss G had already been here for more than 10 minutes. Even now, she did not allow any of them to touch her. Regardless of whether it was a doctor or a nurse, or a man or a woman, no one was allowed to approach her. Even a harmless-looking and considerate nurse handed her a glass of water, wanting her to drink some water to calm down. But the glass was pushed away and dropped by her. It could be seen that her emotions were very unstable, and she must have suffered a huge shock. Her eyes were unfocused, and only the trembling of her body showed that her condition was not very good. "Miss G." The doctor looked at her registration book, and then at her name. He tried his best to comfort her. "You're safe now. This is the hospital. We're going to help you deal with your wounds. The blood on your head is about to scab. If you don't deal with it, bacteria will grow in the wound. I hope you can." Jinwon seemed not to hear him. As the doctor approached, she abruptly curled up her legs, hugged her knees with her arms, and buried her face in her knees motionless. The doctor was about to take advantage of her silence to help her over, but Jinwon suddenly raised her head and looked at them warily with red eyes. It was as though she would bite off the wrist of anyone who dared to touch her. Like a wounded little beast, she licked her wounds and did not allow anyone to approach. The doctor had no choice. Not to mention examining her. They couldn't even approach her to touch her. Although her clothes were only slightly torn, her inner clothes were still there. Her pants and all the important parts of her body were not touched, and she did not suffer any irreparable damage. Jinwan seemed to have suffered more than this simple stimulation. In her heart, there seemed to be a huge black hole that had been dug out today. There were countless scars in it. She was afraid of exposing them, but she could not hide them in her heart. Chapter 202. Seeing him come in, the medical staff all turned to look at the man with a strong aura. Mo Jingshan was still dressed in the same clothes. His shirt was stained with some blood from Jinwan's head, but he did not look disheveled. Seeing this cold and tall man with a cold and solemn expression on his handsome face, all the medical staff in the consultation room were afraid of his clear and cold gaze. After all, he had sent her in for more than 10 minutes, but no one had been able to treat Miss G's wound. Sir, Miss G doesn't want us to touch her. One of the doctors spoke up. Her emotions are unstable. We're afraid that if we forcefully touch her, it will add too much burden and agitation to her heart. You see. Mo Jingshan looked at Jinwan, who was surrounded by several people, pursed his thin lips coldly, took long steps, and went straight over. When he approached, Jinwan was still curled up there helplessly, and did not even raise her head. He had never seen Jinwan like this. The Jinwan he saw was cheerful and bright. Although her personality had changed a few months ago, she was still the same as before. It was just that she was more rational, and had more goals in life. She was still as confident and bright as ever. He had never seen her so pale, and her eyes were filled with fear, as if she was on guard against the entire world. She even curled up there, her body trembling nonstop. She didn't dare to look at anyone. She put her hand by her mouth and bit her finger hard. It was as if there was something that she couldn't bear, and was constantly disturbing her rationality. Mo Jingshan bent down, carried her from the corner of the wall by the bed, stroked her back and said softly, "You are injured. You need to see a doctor. Be good. We'll go back after treating your wound." Hearing Mo Jingshan's voice, Jinwan slowly raised her head. She could not hide the frightened expression on her face. However, because she saw that the man beside her was Mo Jingshan, although she did not resist his touch, her eyes were still full of wariness. Seeing that she had become obedient, the doctor wanted to take the opportunity, while she was being held by this man, to clean the blood on her head with alcohol cotton. However, before he touched her, he heard the woman's low and cold voice. "Don't touch me, doctor." Sure enough, other than this gentleman, she really did not allow anyone to touch her. How much stimulation must one have gone through? And how much trust and reliance must one have on this gentleman, to make him the only one who was special? Seeing that she was really afraid of other people's touch, he stroked her head and asked softly, "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" She shook her head. "Does your head hurt?" he asked in a low voice. She still shook her head, but winced at the pain when his hand touched the wound on her head. Mo Jingshan didn't say more. He signaled the doctor with his eyes to place everything that could be used to treat the wound on the shelf by his hand. He then personally wiped the blood from her forehead and cheeks, and then wiped the area around her wound. Seeing that her wound was not very deep, and was only a scratch caused by the cobblestone wall, and did not need to be stitched up, he took the alcohol cotton, and continued to wipe her wound. Although the wound was not deep, it was not small. Jinwan's entire body trembled from the piercing pain from the alcohol cotton. However, when Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her with concern, she bit her lips hard, and did not make a sound. She endured the pain and did not move. "Don't bite yourself." Mo Jingshan took a clean piece of gauze, folded it into a thick square, and placed it by her mouth. When Jinwan bit the gauze, he continued to disinfect her wound. During this time, Jinwan did not make a single sound of pain. However, her increasingly pale complexion revealed how much pain she was in. Finally, Mo Jingshan put the gauze on her wound, and stroked her hair that was stained with blood and sweat. He used a rubber band borrowed from the female doctor to tie her hair to the back of her head, and asked for an ice pack to apply on the swollen side of her face. After doing all this, Jin Wan leaned against his chest and did not speak. She still did not allow anyone to touch her, and was not allowed to do any checkups. He repeatedly asked if she was feeling uncomfortable. After confirming that there were no other problems, Mo Jingshan brought her out of the hospital. After returning to the condo, Jin Wan quickly fell asleep. However, nightmares kept coming, and she would wake up every 5 minutes. Even though Mo Jingshan had been holding her to sleep, she would still wake up frequently. Each time she woke up, she would stare at the lights in the room for a long time, as though trying to ascertain where she was. Only when she gradually calmed down and was certain that she was safe did she close her eyes again. Not long after, she would wake up again. This repeated until the wee hours of the morning. Only then did she sleep a little longer. However, in her dreams, her hands were still tightly gripping onto Mo Jingshan's sleeves, as though she was afraid that he would leave and leave her alone. In the wee hours of the morning, everything was silent. Mo Jingshan's phone vibrated by the bedside. He glanced at Jin Wan, who had slept peacefully for more than half an hour in his arms. He reached for the phone, glanced at it, and picked it up. The other party clearly did not expect him to pick up the call. After so long, he had been ignored countless times. However, this time, he actually picked up. Jingshan. A clear and pleasant female voice came from the other end of the phone. I'm very sorry about Xue's matter. She is. After that delivery incident, I warned you not to touch Jin Wan. Did you ignore my words? The man's voice carried a chill that could penetrate one's heart. The icy temperature seemed to have pulled down the temperature in the room. The woman on the other end of the phone was about to speak when she heard him coldly say, regardless of whether it's you or anyone else in the Su family, since I've already given up on the last bit of tolerance I have for you, from today onwards, you will know the consequences of provoking me. The other party did not have time to say another word before the call was coldly hung up. Mo Jingshan tossed the phone onto the table. He turned to see that Jin Wan had begun to furrow her brows in her sleep. Her uneasy hands were tightly gripping onto his sleeves, as though she was being chased by a frightening person in her dreams. It was as though she had nowhere to run, and her entire body was tense as she slept by his side. The man's hand avoided the wound on her head and rubbed it gently. After several minutes of comfort, Jin Wan's body gradually relaxed. Her face was pressed against his chest, and her brows slowly unfurled. If it was only the incident in the bar's basement that had agitated her, it would be normal for her to feel uneasy. However, from her various actions, it was clear that the agitation she had received was not that simple. Chapter 203. Jin Wan woke up from a dream. The moment she opened her eyes, the room was filled with darkness. She rushed to touch her side. It was not a familiar environment, but it was not unfamiliar either. The moment her hand touched the bedside lamp, the lights in the room abruptly turned on. At the same time, the curtains were slowly pulled open and sunlight shone in. The darkness in the room was replaced by a warm light. After seeing everything in the room clearly, she slowly released a sigh of relief. This was her apartment outside of T University. It was not the basement of the bar, nor was it the barren mountain village in her previous life, where she could not even find a way out. She raised her hand to press against her head, recalling everything that happened last night. She was not sure if it was a dream or not, but the moment her hand touched the wound on her forehead, she immediately hissed in pain. The scene in the bar's basement filled her mind, and her eyes panicked. At this moment, the bedroom door was opened, and she subconsciously raised her head. Mo Jingshan's tall figure stepped into the warm light of the bedroom. Jin Wan's tense emotions immediately relaxed. She released the hand that was tightly gripping the blanket. I thought you were in High City. I can't go back for your birthday, but I have to come over. Mo Jingshan's gaze was clear, as though everything that happened in the bar's basement last night had already passed. He did not continue to agitate her. The man sat down by her bedside. Jin Wan instinctively raised her hand to hug his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. She breathed in the clear fragrance of his body, closed her eyes and softly said, "Thank you." To Mo Jingshan, these two words were meaningless. In fact, they should not have come from her mouth. But to Jin Wan, these two words were the most important. Thank him for bringing her back from the hands of those vicious people who preyed on the weak. Thank him for preventing her from experiencing those terrifying and helpless experiences again. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. What silly words are you saying? Does your head hurt? Jin Wan raised her hand to touch her head, but before her hand could touch the bandage, he held her wrist. Although it's only a superficial wound, it's not small. Don't touch it carelessly. Jin Wan raised her eyes to see that Mo Jingshan's arm was still wrapped around her. She could tell that he did not sleep last night, and spent the entire night taking care of her. She was extremely glad that she had escaped last night, and had not been defiled. Otherwise, she would not know how to face this man now. But when she thought about how her body had been touched a few times last night, even if it wasn't an important part, it still made her feel uncomfortable. Did I not shower after I came back from the hospital last night? She only remembered that she fell asleep as soon as she returned. She had nightmares, and did not have a clear impression of what happened last night. However, it was definitely a mess. Otherwise, Mo Jingshan would not have stayed up all night to take care of her. After you fell asleep, I helped you wipe off the bloodstains on your body. As he spoke, Mo Jingshan helped her tie up her hair. The man was clearly not familiar with combing a woman's hair. No matter how skilled Mo Jingshan was, there were times when he could not handle it. It took him a lot of effort to tie her long hair behind her head. After tying up her loose hair, he patiently said, "It's all in the past. Don't think too much. Go take a bath and relax. Don't touch water here." He gestured with his eyes to the wound on her forehead. Jinwan nodded. Seeing that she had adjusted her emotions well, Mo Jingshan directly went to the bathroom to prepare the water for her. By the time Jinwan entered the bathroom, it was already warm and steamy. She changed out of her soft and thin clothes and sat in the bathtub. She immersed her body in the warmth, and felt as though she had finally found a warm and steady feeling. All of her thoughts, along with the slight pain from the wound on her head, slowly tugged at her nerves. She could finally calm her heart, and carefully recall everything that had happened yesterday. She could not recall what happened in the bar's basement. Whenever she thought about it, she would still feel a lingering fear. If it were any other woman, they would not be able to let go of such a thing so easily. She could only rejoice that things did not go to the worst step. The cause of this matter was Su Shui. Since he clearly knew her identity and background, he still tried to approach her. His goal was most likely not as simple as making her lower her guard and asking someone to kidnap her. His true goal should be to gain a deeper understanding of her. Was this Su Shui related to Mo Jingshan? Su Shui was around 19 years old, and not yet 20 years old. Thinking about the years when Mo Jingshan was in America, she should only be 14 or 15 years old. There shouldn't be any emotional ties between them. However, Jinwan could not be completely sure. After all, Su Shui came from Los Angeles and clearly hated and disliked Jinwan's identity as Mrs. Mo. So who exactly was this person? Did she deliberately use such a method to ruin her? She was so young, yet her methods were so ruthless. Even if she was the daughter of Los Angeles's Swan Group, she would not be so vicious and merciless. The power behind Su Shui could not be underestimated. A 19-year-old girl was so familiar with these underground bar transactions and certain shady businesses. Even her actions were so ruthless and accurate. It must be related to the power behind her and her living environment. America, Los Angeles, the person behind Su Shui. Perhaps this was everything related to Mo Jingshan. Jinwan took a long shower when she suddenly heard movements outside. She got up, changed her clothes, and walked out of the bathroom. She saw Feng Ling standing by the door of the condo. She seemed to have just arrived. They've all been taken care of. Everyone who attacked Mrs. Mo in the bar last night, as well as their accomplices, have all been arrested. Not a single one escaped. Feng Ling was reporting the situation outside to Mo Jingshan. She turned to see Jinwan coming out of the bathroom, and suddenly took out a check from her pocket. "Mrs. Mo, is this the check you signed?" Jinwan was surprised to see this check. She stared at it for a moment and nodded. "It's the two people who drugged me and kidnapped me. In order to save my life, I had no choice but to sign a check for 5 million yuan. But perhaps the knife she had exchanged for 5 million at that time wasn't useless. At the very least, she had gone through a not-so-smooth escape in the middle, and it had more or less delayed her for more than half an hour. That's right. Feng Ling placed the check on the coffee table and said, the two of them wanted to exchange the check and escape from T-City overnight. However, they were discovered by our people. They were captured at the bank, and this check fell into my hands. Jinwan stepped forward to take the check. Looking at the words on it, she directly tore it up and threw the shredded paper into the wastebasket by the side. Chapter 204. With Mr. Mo personally making an appearance, the T-City police did not dare to be negligent. Those who should have been arrested were all caught, and those who should have been dealt with did not live to see the sun rise today. Hearing this, Jinwan subconsciously glanced at Feng Ling. Although Feng Ling did not say much, her meaning was clear. The person who almost tainted her last night was most likely dead. Did I kill him? When Jinwan asked this, her tone was calmer than she had imagined. After all, she remembered how many times she had stabbed that person last night. No, the wounds you stabbed him yesterday were not fatal. At most he lost too much blood. The real cause of death was because he resisted too much when he was being arrested, causing the police to accidentally injure him. Feng Ling mildly curved her lips at Jinwan, indicating for her not to think too much. How could a person who was already half dead have the strength to resist in front of the police? However, even if Jinwan had the answer in her heart, she did not say much. Some people deserved to die. Since things had already reached this stage, she did not have the heart to feel pity for the state of the universe. Feng Ling used this method to stop her from thinking too much, and Jinwan accepted this ending. It was better than letting her know that the disgusting person was still alive, and making her unable to eat every day. Seeing that Jinwan did not say more, Mo Jingshan sat on the sofa and indicated for her to come over. Does your head still hurt? As she approached, the man's hand touched her head. Although he avoided her wound, he purposely touched other parts of her head, as though to make sure she did not have any other injuries. It doesn't hurt. Last night, when I was struggling, I was thrown against the wall and hit my head. Jinwan pulled his hand down from her head and said, I know you're afraid I'll have a concussion. Last night, I did feel a little dizzy, but I'm much better now. Don't worry about me, I'm really fine. She had already calmed down, and needed to think about many things. Recently, no matter if it was her injuries or the various situations, they all seemed to be related to someone in Los Angeles. When Jinwan's hand was held by Mo Jingshan, she suddenly asked, That's Su Shiwei. What exactly is her background? Is her goal to destroy me? Or does she have other plans? Knowing that Mo Jingshan was by her side, Jinwan turned her eyes to Feng Ling and stared into her eyes. I sent her photo to you before the accident. Have you checked it? Any results? Feng Ling's expression faltered. Her gaze paused on Jinwan's face for a moment. She was about to speak when she suddenly felt Mo Jingshan's grip on her hand tighten. There's nothing for you to do here. Go out first, Mo Jingshan calmly said. His words were directed at Feng Ling. Seeing Feng Ling turn to leave, Jinwan subconsciously tried to withdraw her hand from Mo Jingshan's, only to be held tightly by him. What do you want to ask? He looked at her, his eyes clear and calm. Jinwan looked at him, and suddenly felt a strong urge to pull her hand out of his. But Mo Jingshan didn't let go, and looked at her fixedly. Let go of me first. She frowned and tried to pull her hand out of his palm several times. I won't. Jinwan was exasperated. She wanted to be angry, but it wasn't the right time. She could only grit her teeth and ask, Is Su Shiwei the fiancé you had in America? Mo Jingshan stared at the woman who was sitting on the sofa with him. Her slightly pale face was clearly suppressing her emotions. There was even a piece of gauze stuck on the wound on her forehead. Under the light from the window, she appeared frail and weak, but she still had the stubbornness of trying to maintain her rationality. No, he answered. No. Jinwan's expression was surprised. Then why did she target me? Could it be that everything that happened before and after was just a coincidence? Su Shiwei came from Los Angeles. There shouldn't be any mistake about this. If she isn't your fiancé, who else could she be? It can't be that a woman who appeared out of nowhere is a lunatic who finds me an eyesore and wants to harm me, right? She must have a motive for everything she did. After being reborn, Jinwon was too good at enduring. After enduring for so long, she really couldn't take it anymore. After what happened last night, who could endure it? She stared at the handsome face in front of her and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath and tried to pull her hand out again, but she still failed. I don't have a so-called fiancé. At least for now. I only have you, Mrs. Mo. Mo Jingshan didn't allow her to pull her hand away. Just like that, they held hands and looked into her eyes. Things in America can't be explained in a few words, but you have to believe that from the beginning to the end, I only have you, Jinwon, as my woman. Although my past can't be considered a blank piece of paper, no woman has ever left a mark on it that shouldn't have. I'm your husband. I am now, will be, and will always be. Jinwon's expression still didn't soften. I'm not a domineering and unreasonable woman. I don't even care about your past in your past. I'm very realistic, so I only look at the present and what's in front of me. But the person who I've always ignored and didn't even consider deeply has challenged my bottom line again and again. She keeps trying to find a sense of existence in me. I can't tolerate it. I know. Mo Jingshan held her hand. I'll deal with it. How to deal with it? Up until now, she didn't even know who the person hiding in the dark was. Jinwon took a deep breath, suppressed her emotions, and said coldly in a low voice, I have a headache. I'm going back to my room to sleep. With that, she suddenly stood up from the sofa and forcefully pulled her hand out of his grasp. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the direction of the bedroom without looking back. Mo Jingshan could see that she was really angry. She was just restraining herself and did not explode. However, it was clear that she wanted to be alone and did not want to talk to him. She did not want to talk to him at all. Jinwon directly entered the bedroom and slammed the door shut with a pung sound. She recalled the bloodstained wedding dress doll from last time and the thrilling events from last night. She wished she could dig 3 feet into the ground to find the woman hiding in the dark. Did she want to steal my man? Come on, if you have the ability, just fight me face to face. What's the purpose of hiding in the back and messing around? To drive a wedge between us? Or to make her restless? To do these things again and again to challenge her bottom line? Did he think she would be afraid? She knew she should be more rational now. She couldn't push Mo Jingshan away at this time. Otherwise, as Xia Tian had warned her, this piece of meat would be taken away without her knowing. But right now she was really angry. Chapter 205. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Jinwon did not reply. She sat on the bed, holding her breath as she thought to herself. Forget it, forget it. This piece of meat was covered in gold. It was too precious and hard to guard. Whoever wanted to take it away could do so. She didn't want it anymore, alright? The door was knocked several more times. After a few seconds of silence, the man's calm voice rang out. Wan. Jinwon laid on the bed, covering her face with the blanket. She was unwilling to hear his voice. Mo Jingshan knew that she had locked the door from the inside. His hand futilely twisted the doorknob. He softly said, Wan, open the door. Jinwon did not make a sound. She buried herself in the blanket and used a silent method to respond. This woman's temper came as she pleased. There was no way Mo Jingshan would allow her to lock herself in the room like this. His tone became much harsher. Jinwon, open the door. Hearing his heavy tone, Jinwon abruptly sat up from the bed. She resisted the urge to throw the pillow against the door. I'm not opening it. My head hurts. I want to be alone. If you have a headache, go to the hospital. Why did you lock yourself up? Open the door. The man's voice was low and heavy. His tone was clearly colder. I'm not opening it. I'm not going anywhere. I want to sleep. Jinwon. Mo Jingshan, I don't want to talk to you right now. Do you want to open the door yourself or do I have to open it? Jinwon remembered that last night in the bar's basement, he had kicked open the sturdy door. He had many ways to open the door. She was indeed unable to stop him. She hugged the blanket and laid on the bed unmoving. She decided not to speak. Let him do as he pleased. After all, he was the one who bought this condominium. If he wanted to kick it, he could. After a moment of silence, Jinwon suddenly remembered that since he was the one who bought this condominium, he most likely had the keys to every room in this condominium. Thinking of this, she abruptly sat up and ran off the bed. She rummaged through the table and drawers by the bed, and finally found the bedroom key in the drawer at the bottom of the bedside table. Seeing that the key was not in his hands, Jinwon finally relaxed. She placed the key back into the drawer, and returned to the bed to continue covering herself with the blanket. Originally, she was just acting in a fit of pique, but after a while, she fell asleep under the quilt. When she woke up again, it was already evening. The sunset hung in the distant sky, and the room was a little dark. She got up and glanced at the door that was still closed. Mo Jingshan actually did not come in. Moreover, there was no sound outside at all. Did he go out? Or did he simply fly back to High City out of anger after being ignored by her? She slept for a few hours, and in these few hours anything was possible. Jinwon sat on the bed for a while, and listened carefully for any movements outside. There really was no sound. She abruptly lifted the covers and got off the bed. She walked to the door, and pressed her ear against it to listen again. The entire apartment was so quiet that it was as if she was the only one there. Jinwon opened the locked bedroom door. She slowly opened a gap, and saw something on the ground in front of the door. She paused and couldn't see clearly, so she opened the door further. Just at the moment when the bedroom door was completely opened, as if everything had its own switch, the dim room in the evening suddenly lit up, especially the light in the living room, which set off the roses on the floor, particularly eye-catching. A large area in the middle of the living room was filled with roses, and the heart-shaped flower path in the middle was even more unique. Even in this heart-shaped flower path, there were even 21 cakes. The first cake was white, representing the pure white and flawless angel when she was 1 year old. Then the color of the cakes gradually deepened, from white to pink to red, until the last, the 21st cake, was red representing marriage. Jinwon stood stiffly in front of the door, so busy throwing a tantrum that she even forgot that today was her birthday. Moreover, it had been too long since she had a birthday, and this kind of birthday atmosphere was particularly strange to her. The whole room could only see the rose path and the huge heart-shaped cakes. She raised her eyes and looked around, but did not see Mo Jingshan. She walked out of the door. As soon as she passed the first white cake, she suddenly saw a burst of bright fireworks in the sky outside the window. Jinwon stared blankly out of the window and took another step forward uncontrollably. When she passed the second cake, there was another burst of fireworks outside the window. She looked out of the window as she walked, until the last cake. Because it was heart-shaped, she walked back to the starting point, at the bottom of the heart-shaped cake. As soon as she stepped on the last red cake, there were no more fireworks outside the window. Instead, on the balcony outside the French windows, a light slowly lit up. A man in a white shirt stood there. There was a fire in his hands and fireworks that had not yet been set off by his feet. Jinwon was stunned, subconsciously rushed over, and opened the French windows. "Looking for me?" Mo Jingshan glanced at her with a calm smile, and the torch in his hand lit the unlit fireworks. Even when the bright and beautiful fireworks exploded in front of her, Jinwon was still looking at the man standing in the fireworks. She stood there unmoving. It was as though the entire Tea City was about to be shaken by this sudden rain of fireworks. Meanwhile, the person whose birthday was actually being celebrated stood there like a fool, staring blankly. She did not even know when Mo Jingshan walked over. She only knew that the man held her hand and planted a light kiss on it, saying softly, "1-year-old Jinwon, happy birthday." Before Jinwon could react, the man had already hugged her and planted a kiss on her forehead. 2-year-old Jinwon, happy birthday. Jinwon. 3-year-old Jinwon, happy birthday. 4-year-old Jinwon, happy birthday. He kissed her hands, her face, her nose, the space between her eyebrows, her forehead, her ears, her cheeks, and so on. 20-year-old Jinwon, happy birthday. When she was about to say 21 years old, The man finally planted a kiss on her lips. He did not move away but pressed his lips against hers, saying softly, 21-year-old Mrs. Mo, happy birthday. With that, he abruptly pushed Jinwan, who was still absent-minded, against the glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. This kiss was not as light as the previous ones. Instead, it seemed to be full of possessiveness and aggression, imprisoning her firmly between the window and his chest. The kiss became deeper and deeper. When Jinwan came back to herself, she raised her hand to block his chest, but he held her back, and his tongue, which had already invaded her body, drilled deeper into her body. Jinwan could not push him away. She opened her eyes and abruptly bit down on his lips. Although it was not a heavy bite, the man paused and lowered his eyes to look at her. Jinwan wanted to say that she was still angry, but she could not say it. Chapter 206. However, the man in front of her stared at her. His deep, black eyes were filled with traces of a smile. His smile was seductive, as though he was a pervert who brought disaster to the world. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he leaned down to press his lips against hers. There was no further entanglement. Instead, he licked her lips inch by inch, filling the air with ambiguity. Finally releasing her lips, he held her waist, preventing her from turning her head away. He said in a low and hoarse voice, "Even if I'm angry, my birthday still has to be celebrated. If I don't give you a proper explanation before midnight, won't I have another baseless accusation?" Jinwan looked at his innocent appearance and pushed him angrily. "I'm not that unreasonable." "That's right. You're very reasonable. Yesterday, you acted as a hero saving a damsel in distress. Today, you dare to lock me outside the door in? That's because you weren't honest with me." Jinwan forcefully slapped his hand away from her face. Although she was clearly moved, she still had to hold back her anger. Right now, her expression was indescribable. It was likely that it was slightly twisted, but she could not be bothered to hide it. However, she was no match for his strength. Jinwan had already been brought into the floor-to-ceiling window. The window was not closed. She tried to push his hand away, but the man placed a knife in her hand. "Jinwan, cut the cake or just cut me. Choose one." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild, but his gaze was indifferent as he watched her. It was clear that he had already seen through her thoughts. "Aren't you still angry? Where do you want to cut?" He leaned over, leaning in front of her face to look at her expression. "The door is already closed, and you've held back your anger for too long. Rather than having a cold war by yourself, why don't you cut me a few times? I saw that you cut me very cleanly last night. Do you want to continue venting your anger today?" Jinwan gripped the knife tightly, glaring at him. The feeling of punching cotton was truly an internal injury. "Who says I want to have a cold war with you? I'm not that bored." Jinwan abruptly turned around, picked up a cake on the ground and cut it. She then picked up the cake and put it on the table by the side. After cutting it several times, she picked up another one and continued to cut it. From beginning to end, she did not look up at her again. Mo Jingshan stood by the side watching her. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that she was using the same strength she used to cut him to cut the cake. The pung-pung sounds indicated that she was indeed in a bad mood. He didn't say anything and handed her the cake for her to cut. After cutting one, he passed her another. After cutting for a long time, Jinwan was tired. She turned to see that there were still a few intact ones on the ground. Mo Jingshan picked up another one and handed it to her. She stood there with the knife covered in cream in her hand. The man looked at her with clear eyes, and his eyes were filled with the indulgence that belonged to her. For a moment, Jinwan didn't know what she was angry about. He had clearly explained to her that even if his past couldn't be considered a blank piece of paper, no woman had ever left a mark on it that shouldn't have. His words were already clear enough. What else did she want him to say? Jinwan didn't know why she was so angry with him. Was it because his past in Los Angeles had been provoking her? Did this mean that the other party had succeeded in provoking her? She suddenly rubbed between her brows. She didn't think whether her jealousy was really unreasonable. She threw the knife away and went to the bathroom to wash her hands, washing away the cream on her hands. At this moment the doorbell rang. Jinwan slowly washed her hands and saw Mo Jingshan open the door. Nanheng came in. Seeing the mess on the floor and Mo Jingshan's white shirt more or less stained with cream, he sneered coldly. Did you guys just go through a cream war? Or did you just unlock some new postures on so many cakes? Jinwan didn't have time to think about why Nanheng suddenly came to T-City. His words made her ears burn. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at Nanheng, and then at Jinwan, who was still standing in the bathroom washing her hands. He spoke, his voice gentle and ordinary. Your body is covered in cream. Go back to the bedroom and change your clothes after washing. Nanheng looked at the gauze on Jinwan's head and the slightly swollen side of her face. His gaze was no longer as ordinary. You were so heavy-handed. Didn't you crush that bastard's family jewels on the spot? Nanheng sneered, but his expression was clearly much colder. Jinwan paused and calmly glanced at him. Could it be that Nanheng was here because of the underground bar incident? Or was it related to that person in America? Before I could make a move, that person was already crippled by Feng Ling. Mo Jingshan's extremely cold voice interrupted Jinwan's thoughts. He looked at her. Go back to the room and change your clothes. That person was not only crippled by Feng Ling, but Jinwan also almost killed him with her own hands. Wasn't that even more bloody? Jinwan knew that Nanheng was in the arms business, and she also knew that his relationship with both the underworld and the underworld was not simple. The reason why Nanheng came here was most likely because the people who were dealt with last night were all from T-City's underground bar. Perhaps there was some connection between them. Jinwan did not wish to hear any more about those people from last night. She glanced at them, wiped her hands, and went back to the bedroom. Seeing Jinwan step into the bedroom with the cake and mess on the floor, Nanheng felt that Jinwan seemed to be angry today. Although she didn't say it, when she closed the bedroom door, she made a loud noise. Nanheng raised his brows, looking at Mo Jingshan with an indifferent expression. What's the matter? Did you manage to save her and release her temper? Mo Jingshan ignored him. He casually unbuttoned his shirt and calmly asked, what happened in Los Angeles? What happened? Isn't it obvious? Because of your pressure, Elder Su locked his precious granddaughter up at home. Su Shui was merely used by that person. She dared to come to the country to cause trouble. She is indeed courageous. But it's not like you don't know what kind of power the Su family is relying on. Nanheng spread his hands. But speaking of which, are you really willing to do it? That person guarded you for an entire year, while you were still recovering from your injuries. There seemed to be an undercurrent surging in the air. Mo Jingshan's usually gentle face revealed a biting sharpness. His tone was cold and heavy. If it wasn't for my father's interference back then, taking advantage of the time when I was unconscious to plant such a person by my side, I wouldn't have mistaken her for my savior. Otherwise, why do you think she had the opportunity to guard me for an entire year? Chapter 207. When Nanheng arrived, it was already evening. When Jinwan came out of the room, she saw that Nanheng had yet to leave. Thus, she casually asked Nanheng if he wanted to stay for dinner. In the end, this great sir actually agreed. At that time, Jinwan glanced at the uncleaned cake on the floor and the mess. She wondered if there was no need for her to be so polite to Mo Jingshan's two brothers. That night, Nanheng looked at the takeout on the table, his lips twitching. So, the last time you went to Old Chin's place, you personally made a sumptuous meal. And now that you're here, you can only eat takeout? Mo Jingshan tossed the disposable chopsticks to him, indifferently saying, do I look like I have the leisure to make you a sumptuous meal right now? Nanheng raised his brows, turning his gaze to the Jinwan who had now become a good wife. Jinwan pushed her long hair to the side, showing him the gauze on her forehead. She used a casual tone like Mo Jingshan's to say, do I look like I have the ability to make you a sumptuous meal right now? Nanheng. Nanheng snorted, breaking the disposable chopsticks with a paw sound. He did not waste any words and directly tasted the food, raising his brows. Fine, it's my fault for not coming at the right time and place. Thankfully, this hotel's chef's skills are not bad. It's barely edible. This was T-City's most famous hotel. It was said that the dishes were famous in the country. Yet at Nan Heng's place it was barely edible. Jinwon also picked up her chopsticks. After taking a bite, she felt that this man was the one who said one thing, but meant another. It was clearly so delicious. She had just sat down when she saw that Imo Jingshan had also come over. She paused and subconsciously began to add food to Nan Heng's bowl. Come eat more. She kept piling food into Nan Heng's bowl. Nan Heng watched speechlessly as the food gradually piled up into a small mountain, suspecting that something was wrong with Jinwon's brain. Her man was just sitting by the side. Why was she adding food to his bowl? Was she purposely trying to disgust her man? Nan Heng picked up the bowl that was piled high and glanced meaningfully at Imo Jingshan. Sure enough, he saw Imo Jingshan sitting there with an indifferent expression, as though he couldn't wait for him to finish eating and leave. Last time on your birthday, I cut your cake and ate so much. Today is my birthday, so I should return the favor. You can cut whatever you like. Jinwon put the knife in front of Nan Heng and piled the only 4 cakes that survived out of the 21 on the table. Although it was a gradient, the last few cakes were pink to red, and they were all very bright colors. Nan Heng took a look at Jinwon, picked up the knife with a faint smile, and casually pointed at the 4 cakes. Finally, he looked at the last big red cake, and the pair of dolls in wedding suits made of black, white and red chocolate. He picked up the knife, and was about to cut it from the middle. Try cutting it. Imo Jingshan's tone did not change. When he spoke, his expression was indifferent as he coldly stared at Nan Heng. Nan Heng raised his brows and sneered. Jinwon said I can cut it as I please. Imo Jingshan's gaze casually shifted to the other 3 cakes, meaning that if he wanted to cut it, he would cut the other 3. If he dared to cut this cake with dolls, he would definitely not live to see the sun tomorrow morning. Nan Heng sneered and put down the knife. Fine, I'm not the birthday boy. Besides, I'm really not interested in things like cakes. Oh, Jinwon indifferently responded. What a coincidence. I'm also not interested in cakes recently. Nan Heng smiled mockingly. If you really don't want to eat it, I'll throw it away for you when I leave. Before he finished speaking, Imo Jingshan directly picked up the mouth of a fish from the takeaway box and threw it into his bowl, saying coldly, Eat. Nan Heng looked at the fingernail-sized fish mouth in his bowl. Did he want him to shut up? He suppressed his laughter. Your woman doesn't plan to eat this cake at all. It's clear that the 2 of us are not interested in sweets. If you don't throw this cake away, are you going to keep it at home and seal it as a fossil? Imo Jingshan raised his eyes and said coldly and indifferently, Do you have a problem with me keeping it as a fossil? Don't care about him. Eat more. Jinwon suddenly picked up all kinds of delicious food and put it into Nan Heng's bowl. She raised her voice and interrupted. What else do you like to eat? I'll help you pick it up. Nan Heng looked at Jinwon's expression with a forced smile and did not say more. Even though he did not usually like to eat meat, he still gave her face and ate some of the food in his bowl. He gave Jinwon another look. It went without saying that she dared to throw a tantrum with Imo Jingshan, but he did not have the ability to pick a fight with Imo Jingshan here. It was possible for him to cooperate with her and make things difficult for Imo Jingshan. The result was that Nan Heng was chased out before he could finish his bowl of rice that was piled up like a mountain. Before he could eat his fill, he was almost disemboweled by Imo Jingshan's cold dagger. As if this was not enough, he even had to clean up the unfinished takeout box. In the end, Imo Jingshan even added a cold word. Scram. TSK. He finally understood what Qin sighting meant when he said they were going to torture him to the point of Stockholm Syndrome. It was indeed quite King inhumane. Tomorrow was Monday. Logically speaking, Jinwon should return to T University to continue her classes. However, Imo Jingshan did not seem to have any intention of returning to High City. It was likely that she would be resting in the condo tomorrow. Jinwon sat on the bed in the bedroom, holding a business management textbook in her hands. She planned to roughly read through the contents of Professor Lin's lecture tomorrow. The spacious bed was soft, and the temperature in the room was adjusted. Although T-City hadn't entered winter yet, there was the sound of wind blowing tonight. Compared to the sound of the wind outside the window, This moment of silence actually gave one a sense of tranquility and security. Whether the true sense of security came from the warmth of this room, or from the man living in this condo with her, she could not be bothered to think about it. The man pushed the door open and entered, breaking the silence in the room. His long legs took steady steps as he walked towards her without saying a word. The woman who was reading on the bed raised her head. Her expression was calm, and the unhappiness from before was gone. Her voice was light and emotionless. I'm returning to T University to attend classes tomorrow. The man furrowed his brows, coldly replying, No. Chapter 208. Although Jean Wan's voice was calm, it clearly hid a hint of toughness. After she finished speaking, she lowered her head and continued flipping through the book. After turning a page, she said in a normal tone, Then, let's book a plane ticket back to High City. I'll go back with you. I'm not going to study anymore. After I recover, I'll stay behind you and be an idle rich wife. Anyway, you don't lack money. Even if I casually take out a few $100 million, or even a few billion to blindly invest, and lose a few $100 million every day, you can still afford to squander like this. If you really want to lose, go ahead. I can indeed afford to raise you. Mo Jingshan did not mind at all the sarcasm in her words. Instead, her fists landed on cotton, causing her to feel strangely irritated. Oh. Jean Wan forcefully squeezed out a cold word from her mouth. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at the side of her face that was still slightly red and swollen. Although it had mostly subsided, it would still take at least a day for it to completely disappear. He took the book from her hands. When Jean Wan raised her eyes to look at him, he said, Be good, don't be angry. If your face is not swollen tomorrow morning, I'll let you return to T University. As he spoke, the man's hand caressed her face. Looking at the red and swollen side, his eyes clearly flashed with coldness. Jean Wan turned her face away to avoid his touch. She lifted the blanket to cover her legs and moved to lie down. Then I'm going to sleep. More rest will help reduce the swelling. However, before she could lie down, the man abruptly pulled her out of the bed. Jean Wan had just struggled when she was pulled into his arms by the bedside. What do you want to hear? He held her and did not let her move away. When Jean Wan raised her eyes to glare at him, his dark eyes watched her. About everything that happened to me in America? Or about that so-called fiancé you've heard of in Los Angeles? Do you think I'm not honest enough with you? Or did I say something that touched your bottom line and angered you to this extent? Jean Wan felt that she did not have the right to ask Mo Jingshan to be completely honest with her. Besides, those were indeed things that happened before their marriage. She was well aware of how he treated her. In the past, she had sworn that no matter how many women Mo Jingshan had, in her eyes, they were all failures. But when she really wanted to understand, she found that she was actually a ridiculously narrow-minded woman. He said that no woman had left a mark on his piece of white paper. Whether there was a mark or not was secondary. The key was that such a woman did exist in Los Angeles. Jean Wan was very clear about Mo Jingshan's attitude, so it was meaningless for her to haggle over this. Did she leave a mark on his paper? Or was it just that she was his wife in this marriage? His love and pampering for her seemed to have coexisted from the first day of their marriage. Everything seemed to be so natural. What about the marks? Did she stay? Mo Jingshan often looked gentle, but Jean Wan knew very well that he was cold-hearted to those who had nothing to do with him. No one could easily influence any of his decisions and choices, whether it was his enemies in the business world, or the women who tried to approach him. Anyone who tried to do anything to him was like hitting a stone with an egg. Jean Wan felt that she had been so sheltered under his wings that she couldn't tell the direction. She was indeed under his wings, but how far was this position from his heart? In fact, it was good for her to keep calm and look at things from the perspective of a bystander. Otherwise, once he got serious, it would be the most terrible. Seeing that she didn't speak for a long time, but her eyes suddenly seemed to inadvertently glance at his chest, where his heart was. Mo Jingshan pinched her chin hard, reminding her to come back to herself. Jean Wan, speak. Jean Wan came back to herself, raised her eyes, and saw that the man was patiently gazing into her eyes. "How can I not be angry, Anne?" he coaxed in a low voice. Jean was also wondering why she was angry. Originally, she should have asked him why he got engaged to that woman in America, why he left America, and why he married her not long after returning to High City. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, they became, "If I didn't ask you to return to the U Garden a few months ago, if I didn't say I wanted to live a good life with you, if I didn't continue to make trouble every day for the sake of divorce, and if I really listened to Mungran's advice to commit suicide at home, if it really came to that, you would agree to divorce me, right?" Hearing her so-called assumption, Mo Jingshan's eyes instantly turned as dark as ink, and his gaze became much colder. "Once you return to America after the divorce, you'll definitely have women like In Shuyen and Ji Mingran by your side, not to mention your ex-fiancé in Los Angeles. I'm saying if you don't have me, who will you choose to spend the rest of your life with?" Although she knew that once she said these words, Mo Jingshan would definitely feel that there was a big problem, but she still asked him. America. These two words had always tugged at the most sensitive nerves of her two lives. She did not want to touch it, but she could not hold it in. The man's gaze was dark as he watched her. It was like the deep sea that had been splashed with ink, boundless and filled with the freshness of the sea breeze. He suddenly let go of her arm, releasing her from his embrace. Jean had yet to react when Mo Jingshan had already placed her on the bed. He expressionlessly stood up, speaking mildly. "I'll go get an ice pack. Apply more cold compress on your face tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll ask Feng Ling to accompany you to T University." After speaking, the man turned and left the bedroom. Jean was stunned. What did this mean? She sat on the bed and thought for a moment before realizing that he seemed angry. Wasn't she the one who was originally angry? Why did it suddenly turn to him? For some reason, Jean heart suddenly felt a little flustered. She had been by Mo Jingshan's side for so long. Outside of work, although he was still cold and indifferent in general, he was exceptionally gentle and indulgent toward her. He could be described as absolutely easy to get along with. Occasionally, he would be stern toward her, but it would always be a light warning. He would always give in to her. Unlike how he treated other people, Mo Jingshan would never say a single harsh word to her. Mo Jingshan had never been truly angry toward her. Today was the first time. She was not even sure if her earlier assumption had caused him to sense something or arouse his suspicions, or if the strange assumption she made regarding the divorce and who he would choose in America had touched his bottom line. He couldn't possibly be suddenly angry, right? Chapter 209. This was the first Cold War in a long time. Jean resisted the urge to go out and take a look. She shut herself in the bedroom and refused to step out. The next morning, she took a shower in the bathroom. She saw that the scar on her face was almost unnoticeable. She only needed to put on a layer of foundation to hide it. Only the gauze on her forehead was slightly noticeable. She planned to find a nearby hairdresser to cut her fringe to cover it. Anyway, her hair was of good quality and grew quickly. When the scar on her forehead gradually faded, her fringe would grow back. It would not affect her appearance at all. The living room was quiet. Jean changed her clothes and walked out. The moment she opened the bedroom door, she was met with a pair of eyes. Mo Jingshan met her gaze calmly. He sat in the living room. It seemed like he had not slept all night. Jean stood by the door and watched him. He did not seem to have any intention of making a sound. If Jean had not come out and seen him, who knew how long he would have sat here? Facing Mo Jingshan, the atmosphere was so heavy that she instinctively held her breath. At this moment, Feng Ling opened the door and entered. Clearly, she had received Mo Jingshan's notice to send Jean back to T University today. However, the moment Feng Ling entered, she sharply sensed the undercurrent between the two of them. She stood by the door in a daze, and was about to turn to leave when Mo Jingshan called her back. Send her to T University. Feng Ling paused and could only turn back. She saw that Jean had already changed. Although there was a wound on her forehead, she seemed to be in good condition. However, the living room was eerily quiet. In the end, Feng Ling spoke up. Madam, Mr. Mo has arranged a temporary transfer for me in T University's business department. From today onwards, I can follow you around in school. Don't worry, I'll do my best to keep a low profile. I won't let others know that I'm your bodyguard, and won't affect your normal life. Temporary transfer? Then you'll live with me in T University? Jin Wan looked at Feng Ling, hearing that Jin Wan still planned to live in school and not return to the condo. Feng Ling subconsciously turned to Mo Jingshan, who was sitting on the sofa. The man on the sofa did not speak, as though their conversation had nothing to do with him. I'll follow wherever you live, Feng Ling replied. Jin Wan did not speak again. Her eyes seemed to inadvertently drift toward the sofa. In the past, Jin Wan didn't understand. People always said that Mo Jingshan was a noble creature who could freeze people to death just by sitting there quietly. She always felt that it was an exaggeration. She admitted that he was cold and noble, but it was too exaggerated to say that he could freeze people to death in an instant. How could he be so scary? But now, Mo Jingshan only sat there and did not say a word. But Jin Wan could deeply feel. She had really offended him last night. Those inexplicable hypotheses seemed to have inadvertently touched his reverse scale. He felt as if he had plucked the fur off a tiger's head. Was what he said yesterday too much? She looked at him and was about to speak when she heard Mo Jingshan's phone ring. He picked up the call and did not look at her again. Countless words were stuck in her throat. Jin Wan really wanted to say that she did not mean it that way last night. Divorce and questioning were all her hypotheses. She had been out of her mind to cause trouble on the birthday that he had meticulously planned for him. She wanted to apologize, but after trying for a long time, as she watched his cold back view as he stood up to answer the call, she could not say a single word. After all, her anger yesterday was just a simple matter of being a little jealous and throwing a tantrum with him. But Mo Jingshan was really angry. She was just relying on the fact that he had always given in to her. That moment of incoherence had caused her to be caught unprepared. I still have matters to attend to at the company. I have to return to High City today. When Mo Jingshan put down the phone, he turned back to see that Jin Wan had not left. He lowered his head to look at his watch, his tone calm and unperturbed. Have Feng Ling send you to T University before 8. If you want to stay in the dormitory, that's fine. I'll have someone pack up your luggage and send it to the dormitory. If you really don't want to stay in this condo, since it's already under your name, you can rent it or sell it. Are you leaving now? Jin Wan held it in but still blurted out. Mo Jingshan looked at her. Jin Wan thought that he would at least say something, but in the end, the man did not say anything. He picked up his jacket and turned to leave. Mrs. Mo, it's almost time for Professor Lin's class. Feng Ling saw that Jin Wan clearly wanted to chase after him to apologize, but was still holding it in. She comforted her and said, Mr. Mo must have some matters to attend to at the company, so he went back today. When he finds some time in the next few days, he will definitely come to see you. Seeing that Jin Wan did not respond, Feng Ling asked patiently, Do you want to go eat breakfast first? Jin Wan focused and turned to the kitchen. She took out the cake and cut it while saying, No need. There's still so much cake. I'll eat some, and then go to T University. Feng Ling looked at the cake and asked in surprise, Why are there only 4 left? Jin Wan paused and raised her eyes to look at her. Do you know how many cakes there were here yesterday? I do. On Saturday night, I saw Mr. Mo come. I was surprised at first, but I later learned that he arrived that morning and flew over from High City overnight. He specially booked a nearby bakery and spent the whole day making 21 cakes of different sizes and colors for you. Yesterday, I sent the cakes and roses over with the bakery's staff. Feng Ling saw that Jin Wan's figure seemed to have been petrified and realized that she had said something she shouldn't have. She immediately stopped talking. On Friday night, he flew over from High City. On Saturday night, he brought her back from the bar and took care of her for an entire night. On Sunday night, he angered her to the point that he could not sleep. In other words, he had not slept for 3 whole days. Jin Wan did not speak. She cut open the reddest cake and gently picked up the pair of chocolate figurines on top. She placed them on a plate and carefully placed them there without eating. Seeing that Jean Wan had suddenly lowered her head to eat the cake, Feng Ling approached. Mrs. Mo, did you quarrel with Mr. Mo? However, the moment she approached, she saw that Jean Wan's eyes were red as she ate the cake with her head lowered. Feng Ling was usually a serious and cold person. When she saw that Jean Wan, who had never shed a single tear, had her eyes red as though she was about to cry but was holding it in, Feng Ling immediately panicked. Afraid that she would really cry, Feng Ling frantically passed her tissues to her. Jean Wan shook her head and avoided Feng Ling's hand. I'm fine. Then should I send you to T University now? That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.